website, which is whatonearthishappening.com. There, as is usually the case, you will find a series of images that go along with the concepts that will be presented on the show here today. You want to go to the radio show tab of the site, and listed under the player, today there are 12 images. If you're following along with the podcast, this will be podcast number 85, and you can go to the podcast page for the images. So, 12 images there, and the first image shows what we're really trying to change. Okay? This is an image of a movie theater with a movie playing on the screen. Okay? And the movie that's on the screen shows the condition of the world. It shows a sorcerer behind an immense pyramidal structure. And the sorcerer is looking through the eye at the capstone of this pyramid, similar to the pyramid on the back of the $1 bill. And he's behind it, hidden, well-veiled, and he's pulling the strings of all of the people below in this structure. Okay? And all of the energy that this world has is flowing to the sorcerer, and he is actually breathing in that energy. He is consuming it by breathing it into himself. This is essentially a real quick allegory or metaphor for what this world actually is. It has become a farm of sorts, you could say. It has become humanity has become slaves and feed for this subclass of people, if you even want to call them that, that have basically manipulated us into giving away our energy to them. And there are now, at this time in history in which we live, many people who are beginning to recognize that this is the case. Humanity, you could say, falls into three basic groups. And again, this is a generalization for the purposes of explaining a concept. Humanity falls into three groups, okay? The people who are willing to sit in the chairs and let this continue unabated, let this continue unchallenged, okay? Who don't have the will or the courage to do anything about it, or who don't believe in themselves enough to think that they can do anything about it. So they're sitting there passively accepting the situation, in passive acceptance, okay? And again, this is all about solutions. That's why I'm starting with this. We've already looked at the basic problem. We're looking at how do we enact a solution that will actually work. And the Trivium is a big part of this. Three groups of people. One remains sitting in the chairs, okay? Doesn't think they have the power to do anything, and so they don't try. The second group is the group of people that is represented by the image in this figure, who recognizes the problem, and they are screaming and they are pounding their fists up against the movie screen itself. Okay? They think that they're going to affect change by rearranging the physical things and events, keeping the actual overall structure the way it is, not addressing anything at the causal level. Radio show page underneath the player on the page. Image number 1 showing an angry man standing up in the middle of a movie theater, shouting and cursing and, angry at the movie that is being projected onto the screen. And as I said, we have three kinds of people. The people who may recognize the problem and sit passively by and allow it to continue unchallenged. They don't think that they have the ability to do anything about it. And this is for the people who are even in the theater seeing what's going on. You could say that there's a fourth group that doesn't even recognize any part of it and are completely unconscious. But for the people who do recognize it, you have people who are willing to sit there, remain passive, and ultimately do nothing. The second group wants to shout and complain and try to rearrange things at the level of the movie. Okay? They think that they're going to affect change just by physically restructuring things within the present existing system. And that's magically going to change the movie that they're witnessing take place, the actual manifestation of events. They think they can solve the problem at the level of effects, at the level of manifestation, which is, it's too late. It has already manifested. The third group of people recognize the law of cause and effect and understand that if you're ever going to change the manifested result, you have to rise in consciousness to gain access to the plane of causality. The causal nature of the problem needs to be recognized and accepted. Then you can apply that knowledge of the causes of that effect to the solution. Only then can you actually create a solution that will have any true effect in the plane of manifestation. The people who don't understand the causal factors are the people who are banging on the movie screen. The people who want to get to the causal factors, address those problems from that level of awareness, and then truly change the things that created the problem, not the manifesting of the problem, but the things that actually caused the imbalances to begin with, are the people who are smart enough to realize that the only way you're ever going to change that movie is to get up, walk to a deeper level, which is where the projection room is, okay? Climb up to a deeper level of awareness, which is the projection room, and then actually change what is being projected from the source onto the screen, which is the manifested result. I have brought a quote back from show number one of What on Earth is Happening. I put this quote up there for people's consideration. It was from the book known as Transformation of America by Kathy O'Brien and Mark Phillips. The book is essentially about trauma-based mind control and the occult rulership of this country and, in fact, the world. But some of the most interesting information in the book doesn't even come from Kathy O'Brien, the main writer. It comes from her co-author, Mark Phillips. And this is a great quote from Phillips, who wrote the first section of the book. He said, "For every problem, there exists a solution. The formula for problem solving rests firmly on the quality of the supporting research information concerning the nature of the problem." So he's recognizing that you can't treat the symptoms. You have to go to the causal factors. You have to understand enough about the nature of the problem, the causal factors. And you come to that understanding by gathering information, by coming into knowledge of the nature of the problem. Then you can understand how things got that way. And in that understanding, you are actually obtaining a very, very powerful force. That is the answer to the question, why? If you don't have the why behind anything, you have no power to affect change. So I would invite people in image number 3 now. I am putting an image up from the movie The Matrix, the allegorical trilogy, The Matrix. And this is my favorite character in this allegorical trilogy. Not because he's the villain, one of the villains, I should say, okay, and he's set against the heroes of the movie, okay? You know, I'm not in the habit of rooting for the villains. That's not why I like this guy. I like this guy because he tells people the truth. He is telling people in the second Matrix movie, okay, which I posted this scene back in podcast number 82, okay? With the podcast, you can go on the podcast archive and watch the scene where Neo meets this character in The Matrix 2, Matrix Reloaded. And that scene is so telling okay? Because this guy represents the controlling bloodlines. He represents the controlling occultists of the world. And he has one of the people who the heroes need, but they don't understand why they need him. They've just been told, this is who you need, go get him. And this guy has him, the Merovingian. Again, allegorical. Merovingian has to do with the ancient Merovingian bloodline. However, when they meet with him, he tells them, because they don't really understand why they have come to this situation, they don't understand why they need this character called the Keymaker, they don't understand what the causal factors of their current situation are, that they have come to him with no power. And therefore, he sees no reason why he should cooperate with them. He does tell them one small lie, however. He tells them that we are forever victims to causality. That's his poison pill in the enormous truth that he gives them. And that is not necessarily the case. We do not have to be victims of causality. In the understanding of how the law of cause and effect works, we can come to a level of mastery of ourselves and in our free will decisions, which is what I wholeheartedly agree with Morpheus in this scene. He says, everything begins with choice. The Merovingian tries to convince him that that's not the case, but that is the case. Morpheus is correct in that, ladies and gentlemen. See, that's what the occultist wants people to think, is that your choices, that you don't have free will about how you will conduct yourself and how things will actually then play out as a result of how you conduct yourself. What you don't have free will to do is completely act in total violation of natural law and expect no consequences. That free will does not exist. But we do have free will to the extent that if we understand the law of cause and effect and how we have a choice whether to operate within the parameters of moral law or whether to completely ignore those laws which creation itself has put into effect and which we are bound by. So, to understand how the Trivium fits in with the law of cause and effect and getting to the underlying causality, the causal factors, the nature of the problem, so that we can reverse it from there, what we have to understand is essentially what the Trivium is. The Trivium is a pathway to truth. It is the methodology for knowing how to learn or know anything, how to determine the veracity of information, how to weed through falsehoods and eliminate those impurities so we don't take them in as mental food. That's essentially what the Trivium is. Then based on that accurate information, we can come to understand meaning in things. We could answer the question, why? And then in answering that question, why, we become empowered to act, to actually create true, positive, and lasting change in our lives. This is the way that we can improve ourselves. And ultimately, it has to do with the improvement of the mind. The Trivium is intricately and inextricably interwoven with the human psyche and our ability to improve the quality of our mental, psychological, and spiritual well-being. So let's first, of course, look at the word, okay? Because everything starts with that vibratory energy of the word. Why is this the word for this methodology? And there's a very deep reason it's named what it is called, Trivium. Trivium comes from the Latin language. And before we do this, let's just talk about the origin of the Trivium. Okay? People will trace its origin back to medieval times. They'll trace it back further to ancient Rome, even further to ancient Greece. Some people will go so far as to trace it back to ancient Egypt. The trivium comes out of some of the most ancient mystery school traditions in human antiquity. I would say it predates ancient Egypt. In small pockets, humanity has known and used this technique, this methodology, for discovering truth about anything since time immemorial. So I would say its origin is actually lost to antiquity. We don't know how old the trivium method actually is, although some people will claim it's from different periods in human history, and that's fine. I would be of the opinion that it is actually much older than anything that anyone has stated on record, and it goes right back to the dawn of civilization on this planet. So, the word trivium, we're looking at slide number 4 on the What on Earth is Happening radio show page now. The word trivium comes from the Latin language. Okay, its English equivalency is derived from Latin. The Latin word tres or tria, okay, means 3, the number 3. Okay, and you can see that root in so many different things. Trinary, the word 3 itself is derived from tres tria, okay? And then the second part of trivium is via, okay? Via, vi in Latin. Via in Latin means a way, a path, or a road. Okay, so we also use the term way to describe a method. That's the way to do something. Okay, it also means you start at one location and then you travel to a destination. That's what a path is for. It connects two places. So what we want to connect is where we're at now in the human condition, and we want to actually travel to the truth. We want to get to the underlying causes, the true underlying causes of our current condition, so that we can become empowered to change it. So what trivium really means is the 3 paths, the 3 roads, or the 3 ways. You could look at it as the 3 methods. Okay? I've named it here the threefold path to the truth on this image. The threefold path to truth. As we've seen, 3 is a sacred number in just about every ancient mystical tradition. Thought, emotion, and action, as we saw, is the real Trinity within us. In many ancient religions, up into the modern day, we see this thread throughout time of a Trinity representing something deeper. You know, whether it's called the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, whether it's the sun, the moon, and the stars and planets, or whether it's thought, emotion, and action. This concept of threefold. We have 3 brains: the reptile, the mammal, and the human, the triune brain, which we've talked about so much. The concept of the 3 in 1, okay? The one overarching methodology that is capable of helping us to learn how to know anything, to weed through falsehoods, to come to truth. It's ultimately 3 methods which all bring us to the same place at the center, which represents the truth. Okay? So, the trivium itself is actually part of a larger threefold method or a threefold path. And I put that on image number 5, slide number 5. The trivium works in conjunction with something known as the quadrivium. The quadrivium which means 4 methods or 4 paths, 4 roads, okay? These ultimately form the sacred number 7, as you could see readily. 3 plus 4 is 7. Another sacred number. 7 gods of the ancient world, the 7 chakras, okay? The 7 steps on the ladder to God, the tree of life. Levels on that path, on that symbol. So the quadrivium, or the fourfold path, is the quantification methods that are used in conjunction with the trivium. These are the sciences of measurement. Numbers play a huge role in the quadrivium. And we'll be talking more about the quadrivium next week. That'll be the topic for discussion next week. We'll look into the quadrivium. Okay? We're also going to have some guests coming up that are going to talk about the trivium and quadrivium. And I'll be mentioning that probably next week on the show. Awaiting confirmation. So the trivium and the quadrivium work in conjunction. They both work in conjunction with our 5 senses. Okay? The 5 senses are the bridge between these 2 sciences, these 2 methodologies, ancient methodologies. These are the 2 methods that help our 5 senses come into harmony with truth. That's what needs to be understood. We are using these as methodologies to bring our awareness through our senses, to bring our awareness into harmony with truth. So perception is not reality. It can waver widely off from what reality actually is, from what the truth is. The truth is just that which is. And again, this brings us to the point where I have to talk about the concept of what I mean by the word truth. And people argue constantly about this. You have this solipsistic thread that people are still hooked on solipsism. And I said from day one, this show would not be for everyone, and many people will reject it out of hand. From just show 1, it would not even go any further than that. And there are people to this day who still email me and talk about the concepts I brought up in early shows about solipsism and are in complete disagreement. Oh, there is no actual such thing as truth. We can't actually know what the truth is. Well, that's where you set foot off the journey from the very beginning. You were never on the path. And the idea that people don't believe that there is any such thing as actual truth, that we cannot come to know what truth is. And nobody is talking about here knowing the totality of the mind of God. That's not what I'm talking about when I use the word truth. I'm talking about events which have actually occurred. Learning about what is taking place, which is why I called the show What on Earth is Happening. To know about what is happening, what is taking place in our reality, in the realm in which we exist and operate. You want to get into other dimensions of existence and, New Age ideas like that, fine. I'm not talking about any of that stuff. I'm not talking about knowing the totality of every dimension and every timeline and every planet that exists in the universe. I'm talking about the here and now. Being here and being in the present moment and knowing what's going on around you. That truth. That truth. And it's knowable. It is knowable through the study of the past. It is knowable through taking in information and properly gathering and processing and using it. That is possible. So if you're a solipsist, the show was not for you on day 1, and certainly at this point will not be for you. That is something that I call the biggest lie, and if people buy into that one, they'll buy into any lie. That's what the dark force wants people thinking at all times. I talked about it as to Satanists, it is the biggest sin, because they want to propagate solipsism to everybody but them. So therefore, they can get everyone else to believe that there is no truth, but they know what the truth is. See, to them, for them, solipsism is a sin. That's something that a dark occultist should not engage in, should frown upon. But it is something that he should attempt to sell to the dead, as they call people who believe in this concept of solipsism, this ideology. Once again, we're talking about perception as not being reality, but it could come into harmony with reality. We're not perceiving at all times what the actual reality is. We have filters on, okay, that veil us from an accurate perception of reality. The idea of the Trivium is to attempt to, it's a methodology for removing those filters to be able to see the truth as it actually is, readily accept it, and then do something about it, do something with it. Get involved, step into the slipstream of active co-creation. So when we look at what the Trivium is, and we take a look at how it has, I guess you could say, evolved, or how it has been interpreted through time, there are three general interpretations or overall ways of looking at what the Trivium is. Okay, and I've called these in slide number 6, the classical interpretation, the esoteric interpretation, and the modern interpretation of the Trivium methodology. Okay? Because again, this information on how to acquire knowledge, understand it, and then do something with it has been with us, again, since time immemorial. So there have been different ways of looking at this system. The classical method is probably the one that most people are most familiar with in the words that are used to describe this threefold process or method. And again, the order of the steps are all important. They matter. That's why I put numbers here on this chart. You can't take them out of order. You take them out of order, you destroy the entire methodology. And it will not work for you or anyone else. And that's why some dark occultists have attempted to reverse this process, to take some of them out of order and interchange them, and that you can't do that. Okay, that's like, trying to eat your sandwich before you make it. You have to make the sandwich first, then you could eat it. Okay? So the first step in the classical interpretation of the Trivium is known as grammar, and we'll get to what these represent in a moment. The second step is logic, and the third is rhetoric. So in the classical interpretation, you will hear the Trivium referred to as grammar, logic, and rhetoric in that order. Okay? In the esoteric interpretation, which is the one I generally, I don't even want to use the word use. I mean, you're using the same method regardless of how you look at it. I look at the Trivium as this form, as knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. Knowledge corresponding to the first step, or grammar in the classical tradition. Understanding corresponding to logic, or the second step, the intermediary step. And then wisdom corresponding to rhetoric, the third and final step. There is also a modern interpretation of the Trivium method, and this is the one I'm probably going to spend the most time explaining, because you can use a very accurate metaphor for it in real world terms that people will readily understand. We're going to look a little bit into the esoteric modality, I guess you could call it, but I'm going to focus on explaining the Trivium today through the modern interpretation. And this is input, processing, and output. Input corresponding to grammar or knowledge, processing corresponding to step 2 or logic and understanding, okay? And output is the third and final step corresponding to rhetoric, or what has been called wisdom in the esoteric sense. And this, as you will see, all has to do with information. The input of information, the processing of information, and then the subsequent output of information in that order. So these are the three ways that the trivium could be looked at, can be interpreted, can be seen as modalities or methodologies, okay? I want to show people how this knowledge is quite ancient because we've looked at the esoteric tradition of the Kabbalah in the past on this show. We did several shows on Kabbalah, and we saw that its main symbol, which I've already alluded to today, was the Tree of Life, with its 7 levels, its 22 paths, its 10 sephirot, or emanations. And we've broken these down in the past to help people understand the correspondences. What we have to understand is that at just about the highest level of the Kabbalistic Tree of Life, as this symbol is known, we have the 3 methods of the Trivium corresponding to the Trivium. See, when you climb this tree, or this ladder to God, as it is known in the Kabbalistic tradition, as we've already looked into on past shows, you follow this path that I've outlined here in red on image number 7. We're looking at image number 7 now. And this path, okay, follows up from the bottom, from Malkuth, which is Sephirah number 10, okay, up through Yesod to Hod to Netzah. So if you look at the numbers, we're going backwards from 10 to 9 to 8 to 7, okay? Then through Tiferet in the middle to 6, and then Geburah at 5, and then we're back to the right side at 4, okay, the sphere of Hesed. Okay, now, from that point, we are going to pass through 3 other spheres, okay? One of them is not considered an actual sephirah or an emanation. It is considered, I guess you could call it the source. You could call it the thing from which the Tree of Life springs, from which it grows. It is known as Da'at. And then I'll be looking in this hour at the modern interpretation of the Trivium and explaining the method of information input, processing, and output, which is essentially what the Trivium is. So the call-in number, after that, we'll take calls for the remainder of the show. So the call-in number is 866-841-1065. Once again, the call-in number, 866-841-1065. Have a couple of callers lined up in the queue, so feel free to call in and get in the queue yourself if you have any questions, comments, or anything else that you want to bring up on the show here today. And we are limiting this to the Trivium. We want to talk about the Trivium today. Again, we have a specific topic for today. We're talking about the Trivium. So callers in the queue, let's keep it on topic and on focus. So here we go. We were looking at, before this last break, the esoteric interpretation of the Trivium as knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. Okay, so knowledge, we've seen, is the sphere of Da'at that lies behind the Tree of Life, from which the Tree of Life grows. Okay, the idea that this word is connected in its actual sound with the English word dot is not insignificant. Okay, a dot is a point, a singularity. It's one thing, okay, from which everything springs, okay? It is a period, and this word is period, okay? Through the yod. The yod character in Hebrew, as we've already seen, means hand, and it represents fire, the fire of creation. The hand of God, the hand of the Creator, which fashions everything, from which everything springs. So this isn't an insignificant wordplay coincidence. I would suggest that it's not even a coincidence. okay? But as we're going to the highest rung, we're ascending to the highest rung on the tree of life, okay? The one that lies just underneath Keter, the crown, unity consciousness. We are passing through, okay, from the sphere of mercy, Hesed, through Da'at, knowledge, okay, to understanding, which is sphere number 3, Sephirah 3, which is Binah, which means understanding. Then to the one that is closest to the crown, to Keter, which is wisdom, Hokmah. Again, these 3 paths themselves. You'll notice that there is one sphere on each of the paths of the Kabbalistic tree. We start out at the middle one, then go to, which is the path of mildness or will. Then we go to the path of the left-hand path, which is the path of severity, and then over to the right-hand path, the path of mercy, which then gets us up to that very top Sephirah, which represents unity consciousness or non-duality. And this is the path that can get us there, from knowledge to understanding to wisdom, in that order. And I can't stress that enough. Order plays a role in this. It is what leads ultimately to order, is following this order or this path, this threefold path known as the Trivium, which is represented so beautifully here in the Kabbalistic tree. And they'll never be able to stop a group of people who actually possess the answer to the question why. That is what the Trivium can actually help us gain. Because without why, there is no power. And things will remain just as they are, and probably even spiral into a worse condition until we identify the real causal factors. That's where the problem-solving ability lies. So, we were looking at the esoteric aspects of the Trivium and where this tradition may have derived from. Again, this is ancient Kabbalistic knowledge. This is the ancient knowledge of all esoteric mystery school traditions. You can see that in Freemasonry, the Trivium and Quadrivium are made reference to quite extensively in any good Masonic works. And if they're true esoteric works of Freemasonry, they will not be taken out of order as well, which you will often see this horrendous mistake being made in certain Freemasonic schools, if it is not a deliberate deception to do so. The the other thing is you have to understand that the Trivium also represents, just like the Kabbalistic tree, here we're showing the 3 steps of it represented in the 3 spheres that you arrive at on the path upward up the tree before you arrive at unity consciousness represented by Keter, non-duality, the total unification of one's thoughts, emotions, and actions. This corresponds directly to the Freemasonic pillars that are depicted in the first degree tracing board as well. Okay? So coming up out of the dark pillar is coming into knowledge. Okay? Then understanding. Okay? Bridging knowledge and action. Before you're taking actual action using the male principle, you have to fill yourself up. The desire has to be there of the lunar pillar. And you're filling yourself with information. Then you're processing it. You're coming to awareness represented by the middle pillar, the all-seeing eye. Then you're putting it into action. You're actually ascending upward. And that's the stepwise process of the ladder. Starts at the right pillar, moves to the left in that tracing board. And you can go back onto the Freemasonry shows and take a look at that and see how that correspondence fits in perfectly with the Trivium method as well. Knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. The first 3 degrees of Freemasonry are all about this, ladies and gentlemen. The entered apprentice degree of Freemasonry is about taking off your blinders and the fact that you have to be led to knowledge with an open mind. Okay, you have to be practically dragged to it because you've been resistant to it and you've been hoodwinked. But now the blinders are coming off and you're letting some light in. The rituals of the first degree, entered apprentice. So this is coming into knowledge. The second degree is about the spiral staircase, going into the temple of knowledge itself. Processing information, actual learning taking place. And it's a spiral staircase that you have to follow. You don't know what the actual outcome is yet. You have to get to the top for that vista to open up and the whole picture be revealed. On the way up, you don't actually see it. You're still doing that upward ascension that is often looks like it's a circle or a spiraling process, but you're actually spiraling upward. And then you've arrived at the top of that spiral staircase, which means you have understanding in hand. You understand causal factors. You have the answer to the question why. Now you're empowered. And the third degree, or Master Mason, is mastery over oneself, coming into unison between your thoughts and emotions and your actions, such that your actions don't betray what you know and how you feel. And then its symbol is the trowel, this degree. And you're using it to actually spread what you have come into possession of, which is actual wisdom. That's what the act of wisdom is all about. Putting it out there so that others may partake of the same thing you have. Knowledge and understanding are not yours exclusively. They don't belong to you. These are states you may have reached, but then you have a responsibility to put that into action, which is the rhetoric stage. We're going to get to this in detail. I'm going to go through, again, that's all I really want to say about how the correspondences with esoteric traditions fit in with the Trivium. You can clearly see it if you've been able to follow what I just went through as far as Kabbalah and Freemasonry is concerned. But what I really want to do in this hour is talk about the modern method of the Trivium, the modern interpretation, which is information input, processing, and output. And this one, again, the modern student can readily understand these terms because we use them all the time, every day, and most people out there listening are probably using some form of a computer, a device which does just this. And regardless of how much people want to ignore this or pretend that it isn't true, essentially, that's what everything is here, folks. It's a big computer. We're in a holodeck. We're in a holographic simulation of sorts so that consciousness can have experience. This is all a huge computer program at the highest level, at the most unified fundamental level. That's what consciousness is. It's something that creates scenarios that we can feel as and perceive as real enough such that we can acquire experience. Because again, in the absence of something which the pure consciousness is not, it can never know itself. It can never come to know anything. So this illusory realm has to be created in order to acquire experience and knowledge of itself, of the all itself. And that's why we're in this holodeck, to have an experience in the physical domain. So this is like a computer. It operates like a computer. We operate like a computer, essentially. I'm qualifying this with the term essentially. It doesn't mean we are a computer. It doesn't mean that there's no part of us other than the computing aspect of us. I'm saying essentially we operate like a computer. Okay? We take in information. based on our perceptions, based in things other people have told us, based on direct experiences. We then process that information to develop it into a worldview or an understanding of how things actually work, and then we act. Our behaviors are based upon that input of information and that processing of information. Of the Trivium and how it can actually help us to uncover the hidden truths of our world so that we can actually start taking action once we understand the causal factors that got us to this dark place that we are collectively at. So in image number 8 on the radio show page of whatonearthishappening.com or with this podcast, you'll see that I put the modern interpretation, you could call it, of the Trivium process or method, and listed it as input, processing, and output, which we're going to continue to talk about. And underneath that, I put what this is all equates to, what it's all actually about. The Trivium is ultimately about the input, processing, and output of information, which is ultimately what everything is. Everything is a form of information and energy. What if we look at the word information? Okay, it's the word form is the root of this word, form. Okay? And in order to form a different reality, a different way that things actually manifest themselves, this is the method that we have to employ. Proper information input, proper information processing, and proper information output. And ultimately, where that is all done is within ourselves. That's why it's in formation. If we break it down further, we can say in form at on. Or in other words, to turn, and this is, again, green language. People will doubt and dismiss this, even though there's hundreds of examples throughout the English language where words, just by breaking them apart into their phonetic, not their actual necessary meaning, but into their phonetic components, we can understand what a word is actually saying to us. The actual vibratory energy of the word is a language unto itself that often encodes deeper meaning. We've looked at the term money in this respect being the one I, okay, which they want to sell to people as an illusion of the real thing, as a proxy for the real one I inside of us. And information is saying in form at I on, meaning to turn the one eye on, okay, to actually turn on the all-seeing eye within us. We have to inwardly form ourselves through this process. We are creating ourselves. We are creating the essence of who we are by what kind of information we take in, by how we process it accurately or inaccurately, and then by what we actually do based upon those two previous parts of this triune method. The output is ultimately what is really defining who we are, because the input and processing is determining our worldview, and then the output is determining our behavior and how we treat other people and how we act toward others, the way that we are in this world, how we exist. Our being in the world is ultimately a function of the output. So, and that is a function of how accurately we gathered and processed the information that is all around us. Some people do it very effectively, and therefore their output can be toward higher levels of order and greater success and prosperity and a lack of suffering in their lives. And some people, when they fail at this entire process, they go into deeper and deeper and deeper chains and more suffering. And that's what place that we've come to as a society through our inability to follow this methodology, because this methodology has been occulted. The occultists of this world do not want people to understand the trivium. It's one of the last things they ever want you looking into. They want to keep this information deeply hidden or occulted. Because if you truly learn how to think, excuse me, and come to accurate analysis of the information that is around us, you are then empowered to change it. And that's the last thing they want happening, because they want to stay in the position of power that they have gained through this differential in knowledge by keeping the method for learning from their slaves. That's why the trivium is a completely, it's a topic that has been essentially removed from human consumption for the most part. Most people have never heard the word. They don't understand what the trivium is at all. They have never heard it, and they know nothing about it. Just try to find out, just do an experiment and ask people around you if they know what the trivium is and can explain it to you. Hardly anyone can. And there's a reason for that. So let's look at the trivium, the modern interpretation of it, as information input, processing, and output. And we will recognize this as the 3 steps that any computer performs. Okay, because essentially the brain acts like a human computer, a biological computer. Image 9 shows an image of a computer system. Okay, and we can see that it has input devices, a processing device, and an output device, and output devices. Okay, so the input device, or devices, I should say, shown here by the light blue arrows, okay, is the keyboard and mouse. These are known as input devices. Go on any computer store and you'll find mice and keyboards under input devices, okay? Another type of input device might be a scanner, an externally connected hard drive used for storage. The internet itself is a form of an input device in the modern world, because that's someplace we can take information into the computer through our internet connection. Okay, so these are ways of inputting information into a computer. The hard drive stores it. Okay, that's like the memory capacity of the brain. All right, then it is processed, and that's what determines how good a computer basically is. This all-important step 2. You know, to put information into a computer is one thing, but the all-important step is the third part, the second part, and the third part. But the second part is critically important, because if your computer doesn't have processing power, you can't do anything with any information. It doesn't matter how much you gather. And if it can't accurately process the information, it'll just spit garbage in the output phase. Your computer is only as good as its processor, and the processor's ability to accurately handle the information you are throwing at it. So this is the problem with the people of this planet. They basically have damaged internal processing units, central processing units. The CPU of the computer is often called the brain of the computer. So this is what we are using our brain to do: input information, process it in the brain, and then output it, which actually determines our behavior. And as you know, with any computer, if junk goes in through the input, okay, only junk can come through the output. Junk in, junk out. Good stuff in, good stuff out. This is not my particular computer system. It's just an image I found of a computer system online. And it shows the input devices, the processing unit, and then the output devices being the screen and the printer. These are ways of sharing information. Looking at the data on screen, you could share it with someone else. You could print it out on your printer, okay? The internet is also an output device, because you could take information that you have processed and then send it back up to the internet. So the internet acts as both an input and an output device in the modern world. And that's why it is so useful for really coming to this knowledge and understanding. So let's look at what ultimately the trivium is step by step. In image number 10, we see the 3 steps of the trivium, again in the modern format. Input, processing, and output in that order, listed as steps 1, 2, and 3. I've put the other names in the classical and esoteric systems underneath them. So input is also grammar or knowledge, okay? It's the building blocks of data that we're working with, okay? So we are gathering these building blocks, gathering the raw data from an eclectic array of sources. Eclectic means widely varied, okay? You have to take it all in, as much as you can anyway. And do this without prejudging the information. So this could be considered the right-brained modality within the trivium. It's having that open-mindedness, that receptiveness that is so powerful in the right brain, okay? Because we need to have an open mind and take in data without judging it with the analytical mind. First and foremost, that's the first step toward acquiring knowledge and understanding. The input, once we have acquired it, will help us to answer the questions who, what, when, and where. This is our raw data set. Okay, so this is fairly easy to follow. This is what we do with a computer, and this is ultimately what we do with our brain. Okay, the input, gathering data from an eclectic array of sources without prejudging it in order to answer the questions who, what, when, and where. The raw data. We're taking in the raw data without judging it. Okay? Step number 2 is the processing, and this is all important. Now, before we get to step 2, let me say why people never usually make it to step 2. Most people on the earth don't make it to step 2 in any way that resembles any accurate information processing at all. It's because there is so much of the building blocks, the grammar, the words, the raw data set, the knowledge itself. We are drowning in a sea of knowledge, in a sea of grammar, in a sea of these building blocks of information. There is so much in the world because there are so many people and so much has been created and written and put out there in different forms of media. Most people are so daunted by the task of even doing the input at all because it takes work and time. And they're even more daunted by the first sub-step of part 2, which we're going to get to in a moment, the filtration system of the weeding out process of information which isn't viable or isn't necessary or is just patently false and is put out there as distraction or disinformation, or actually has nothing to do with the solving of the problem that we really want to solve by even taking data in. It's irrelevant data. There's so much trash data in the system, okay? Useless files, so to speak, on the computer, that people don't want to weed through it to go to like a needle in a haystack to get down to what they really need. So most people don't even go through step 1 because they say, oh, the truth is such a needle in a haystack, we'll never find it. Some people believe there is no such thing as truth, which we've already talked about, this dangerous and false ideology of solipsism. So part 2, processing, which is also logic, okay, in the classical interpretation and understanding in the esoteric sense. Processing is comprised of 3 sub-steps, and I've identified these as filtration, correlation, and analysis of data. So first, the data has to be filtered. So now this is what the processor of the computer is doing. Once the information has been gathered, which is step 1, data gathering, then we can filter it and say, this is irrelevant data. This does not have to do with what we are trying to get to. It's maybe a distraction, a form of disinformation. We could apply different techniques to do that. Okay? Fallacy, understanding techniques, to understand logical fallacies. Okay, so this filtration system you could look at as the antivirus or the malware protector that is installed in a computer to make sure in the gathering process, in the part where it comes into the computer through input, that viruses don't get in to the mix. Okay, so that would be filtration. And that's a huge task in the modern world because there is so much false information out there. So we have to have our virus guards installed properly within ourselves so that information which will make us sick doesn't get taken in as mental food. Okay? The second part of the processing is correlation. This is how to group information and see the connections between seemingly disparate sources of information or chunks of information. It is data assembly. Okay? That's what this part of the processing aspect of the Trivium is all about. Finally, there is analysis that is actually going through the data to understand how it is of relevance and how it does connect with the thing that we are trying to get to or understand. That's what the whole process of understanding is about. Data analysis, accurate data analysis. The processor has to be able to compute properly. And again, this ties in with health, because if the central computer of ourselves is our brain, okay, it's the thing that helps us to process information. We have to be in good health. The five senses have to be sharp: sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch, to be able to accurately bring in data from the external world around us, the seemingly external world around us. Okay? So food fits into this in a huge way, in being able to do this process. Okay, getting out of the forms of mind control that we're under through this process of filtration is a huge part of the process. The data filter or the virus protection. Okay, so this is where the Quadrivium comes in a big way in the processing stage. Okay, because this is the methods that help us to properly quantify our data sets. All right. These four methodologies are arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. In that order, once again, the order is critical to know and to keep in mind and to observe. So these are four quantification methods which go hand in hand with the Trivium method and the five senses. We're going to talk about the Quadrivium next week. We're going to have guests on that are going to give their understanding of the Trivium and how it works, to expand on what I've laid out here and we'll be laying out next week. So we'll be looking at this topic for several weeks, probably 4 or 5 weeks. Okay? And we're just coming off natural law, which we covered for like 10 weeks or so. So these are two of the biggest parts of the solution: the understanding of natural law and the application of the Trivium method. All right, so what does the step 2 or processing part of the Trivium help us to be able to do? Simply put, it helps us to learn the why behind anything. What that character in the Matrix talked about as the source of power. We have to know why things are the way that they are. Get down to the causal factors. The causal realm is where problems are identified, addressed, and ultimately solved from. Never from the realm of manifestation, that is putting bandages on self-inflicted wounds and never addressing the underlying psychological reasons that those wounds are being inflicted in the first place. So the question why answers what is the reason, the meaning, or the purpose of something. Some of the most deeply occulted information that has been held back from the people of a planet in order to turn them into slaves. I'll tell you that. So let's wrap up these last 3 slides and then go to the phones. And I apologize for taking so long to get to the phones. I will make it up to you guys. I'm going to get to some calls before this segment is out, but I'll make it up to you. We'll do a whole call-in show about the Trivium. Maybe that's how we'll handle it in the solutions section. For every solution, we'll do a whole call-in show about that particular solution. I think that'd be a nice practice to start. Okay, so because I don't want to totally, ignore callers and, just keep putting that off. So let's see how this segment goes, and we'll hopefully get to some calls before the end of the show. So we looked at input and processing steps 1 and 2. Step 3 here on slide number 10 is output, which is also rhetoric or wisdom. And I have explained this by calling it speech and action that is based upon the knowledge that one has gathered and understands. Okay? Speech and action based upon knowledge that one has gathered and also understands. So you have the raw data, okay, and you have an accurate understanding of that data set. You have weeded out the impurities and you have come to an understanding of what it means or its purpose. Therefore, you can now speak and act based upon that knowledge and understanding. So this all has to do with affecting the world around us through our speech and action. Okay, that's why it's the third step. It is related to spreading or helping to propagate knowledge and understanding, which is this is probably as important, if not more important, than the other 2 steps. Because if you don't put it back out there, how is anybody else going to come to that awareness and understanding? We have to create sort of a feedback loop of this system where we keep putting information back into the system until it becomes common sense and second nature and readily understandable by people. And that's where we've gone wrong. The world is largely silent when it comes to matters of truth. People are too afraid of what people will think of them or how it will inconvenience their lives from a selfish point of view. So ultimately, the output phase is the how behind it all. And how simply means the method by which something is accomplished. Because that's what we're looking for. The method to do something. The method to free the mind. And that's what the trivium is. The trivium is how knowledge and understanding are propagated so that real and positive change can be created. This is the third step. The output, wisdom, the acquisition of wisdom is coming to know how knowledge and understanding can be applied and propagated so that real, true, positive change can come about. Or in other words, how to create the solution to any given problem that may be presenting itself. That is what we can do with the trivium and why it is one of the most important solutions-based approaches that we can take to the current human condition. Now, one thing I want to say before we get to the phones is in slide number 11, I'm talking about direction and how this relates to the trivium, because the trivium is 3 ways, 3 methods, or 3 roads that they converge. They converge on the truth. And I want to, in almost a harsh and caustic way, attempt to obliviate a New Age concept, a New Age idea, an ideology in the New Age movement and people who consider themselves teachers have said this, and I wholeheartedly, resoundingly reject it. They've said that you should never ever use the words "you should" to anyone. And you know what this is? This is utter New Age bunk, is what it is. This is pure right-brained imbalance. See, we talked about the first step of right-brained input being open and receptive. The left brain aspect is the processing aspect. And then the output method is a holistic brain process in which you can't be too forgiving and you can't be too left-brained and violent with it, okay? You have to walk a balance. To say you should never use the words "you should" is to deny that you yourself have come to any kind of knowledge or understanding about anything. And I think that's lying to yourself if indeed you have come to knowledge and understanding about something. See, if you know how a person should get from one place to another, if they're coming and saying, this is where I want to go, and I know I'm not there. And people, you could say, oh, they don't ask. Everybody is asking how to really get to the place where they don't suffer. Because there is not one person that will go up to you and say, I want to suffer. No one. If somebody actually came up and convincingly, and they could get me to a point where I could believe that they genuinely want to suffer, then I would say, that's on you, that's your free will decision, and you don't need to know any of this. Just go right on ahead with what you're doing. But no one makes that claim. Everybody makes the claim, I want to be free. I want to have the things that I desire. I want not to suffer. I don't want to be in suffering. Therefore, they're asking, how do I get to a place? Whether they consciously or physically ask it or not, that's what the people of this world are asking, even if it's a silent form of a question. They're saying, do you know how to get there? And if the answer is yes, I do know how to get there, then you should have no qualms about using the words you should. No more than if someone came up to you and said, how do I get to the intersection of this road and this road? And you have been there many times and you know exactly how to get there from where they're standing or from where their car is at. And you say, yes, if it is true that you want to get there, you should travel in this direction, maybe turn at this intersection, travel in this direction some more, and then you will arrive at your destination that you stated you want to be at. And you're not there right now. So this new age idea of that you should never use this phrase, you should, because you're dancing around other people's ego, I wholeheartedly and resoundingly reject it. And so should you. So I'll end that point on that note. And I'll end this whole section on the Trivium with a quote from the great teacher Terence McKenna, who talked about grammar, who talked about information that surrounds us and that we inwardly form ourselves with. McKenna was a wordsmith like no other. And one of his statements was that the world is made of words. And if you know the words that the world is made of, you can make of it whatever you wish. Think about that in relation to the Trivium. The knowledge, the grammar, the words, taking it in, processing it accurately, then outputting it in a way that can help us to affect true, lasting change and put the solution into practice through wisdom. Terence McKenna never fails to amaze me. Let's take it out with a call. Here we go. Mike in New York, you're live on What on Earth is Happening.
Hi, Mark. Thank you for taking my call. Great show. And I'd like to state that what Terence McKenna was saying.
Hopefully throughout the show. So, last week, we looked at the Trivium. Actually, 2 weeks ago, last week's show again was a replay. And we saw how it was a process of how to go about acquiring truth from an eclectic, varied array of information. In other words, how to weed through information, how to remove inconsistencies with that information, and then to arrive at an understanding, and then ultimately to do something with that understanding, to put it into effect, to put it into practice in the world. So we saw that it was a combination of what is known as grammar, logic, and rhetoric. And we looked at the classical, esoteric, and modern forms of the Trivium a couple of weeks ago. Now, you can go up to my website at whatonearthishappening.com and go to the radio show page, the radio show tab on the site, and you'll see under the player images for today's show. Always with these broadcasts and podcasts, you'll see that I often have images posted that go along with the concepts, and today is no different. There are, I believe, 8 images up on the website on the radio show page underneath the player. So you can follow along with that images to see the information that we're looking at today and some charts and graphs that go along with it. So image number 1 is a bit of a review from last week when we were talking about the Trivium from the last show. So we saw the classical method of looking at the Trivium was grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Or in other words, information gathering, which is grammar. This is like the input of information into a computer, if you want to look at it like that. It's collecting or gathering from a varied and eclectic variety of sources. You can't just pull from one or two places information. You have to be open and not judge the information hastily based on likes or preferences or opinions. This is taking information in regardless of where it comes from. In step 2, you begin to filter that information. Okay, so this is the step called logic in the classical Trivium method. What you're doing here is you're filtering it, and then you're beginning a process of correlation, seeing how the individual data bits relate to each other. Then you can undergo analysis, and that's where the Quadrivium really comes into play, because it is ultimately about the quantification of that data set. We're going to be talking about the Quadrivium in depth today. The third process, of course, is putting the understanding that you have acquired from step 2 or logic into action. And that's called rhetoric in the classical style of the Trivium. Rhetoric is equated with wisdom. It's what you do with what you know. You've come to a level of understanding, and then you're going to put that in practice in the real world. You're going to put that in practice in your life so that it has an effect in the realm of manifestation. Okay? So the esoteric form of the Trivium, we looked at that in conjunction with the Kabbalistic tradition, and we touched on that it is also connected with some of the processes involved in Freemasonry. So last week, 2 weeks ago, the previous show, we looked at the esoteric aspects of the Trivium, and it's the same basic steps. It's just the way that they're viewed or looked at, or the naming conventions of the steps, essentially. And in the esoteric tradition, they were always referred to these 3 basic steps as knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. And again, we saw that in conjunction with the Kabbalistic tree of life, that the tree itself grows from the hidden sphere known as Da'at, D-A-A-T-H, and that is knowledge. And it was pointed out to me actually in a discussion with Jan in the past that it is perhaps, since that is where the tree grows from, that perhaps the entire idea of the tree of life is that humanity has fallen due to a severance with knowledge, okay, due to the tree actually being cut down or knocked over because it is no longer actually connected at the trunk, okay, which is knowledge, the sphere of Da'at, which is said to be where the tree grows from in the Kabbalistic tradition. So we have to make a reconnection to knowledge. There's too much of a de-emphasis on actual knowledge in many different traditions that allegedly claim to be put forward with the intent of advancing the soul and advancing the spirit. And without an emphasis on knowledge, I'm afraid that really cannot be done. It's a pipe dream. Okay, we need to understand what is taking place around us. We can't close our eyes to that, no matter how negative that may seem. Otherwise, we're going to be led in circles, and we're not really going to have an accurate understanding of what is required on our part in order to change the manifestation that we see in the world. So knowledge is a gigantic part of this, and again, it is one of the most important spheres on the tree of life. It is the sphere of Da'at, the hidden realm of knowledge. That leads to the highest rung on the Kabbalistic tree, which is understanding and wisdom. Again, Binah, the third Sephirah, and Chokmah, which is wisdom, the second sephirah, and these are just underneath Keter, which is the crown chakra. In other words, it is the unity consciousness. Okay, it is the Ancient of Days, as they called it in the Kabbalistic tradition. So knowledge, understanding, and wisdom are the three spheres that you arrive at before you reach unity consciousness in this ancient esoteric tradition of Kabbalah, which is totally interwoven and interconnected with the Trivium and Quadrivium methods. Finally, in the modern sense, we looked at the Trivium as being an expression of something akin to a computer system. In image number 2 on the radio show page, if you're following along with the slides I've posted for today's show, you'll see a chart that lists the Trivium process, the Trivium method, in the correct order of the steps, because order is of utmost importance here. You can't take these steps out of order or the process does not work correctly. You can't process information before you've gathered it. Well, you could attempt to, but you're not really going to come out with an accurate analysis if you do so. And certainly attempting to put information into action because before you've come to a proper understanding of it is always going to result in folly and ultimately in chaos. So the process, the linear order of the steps involved in the Trivium method are of extreme significance, and it should not ever be taken out of order. So the first step is input, otherwise known as grammar or knowledge. It's gathering data from an eclectic array of sources without prejudging it, and this is critical. Okay, you can't take your own assumptions, interpretations, opinions, likes, dislikes into this process. This has to be done dispassionately. It has to be done in an open-minded way, not bringing the emotions into play at this step. Okay? This step answers the questions who, what, when, and where, the raw data of the situation that needs to be gathered before you can start accurately processing that data. Okay? Step 2 is the processing stage of the Trivium method. And this is logic, or also known as understanding. Okay? It's comprised of 3 basic sub-steps. Again, we touched on this in the last segment. The filtration of the information, or the removal of bad data. Okay, the removal of data that is contradictory. So you're going through a specific process to weed out contradictions in the data so that you can get to the truth of the matter. Okay, so you have to weed out logical inconsistencies. Then you're going to correlate the data. You're going to put it into, I guess you could look at it as subgroupings of data. This is related to this. This is related to this. This is related to this. All right? And you're going to ultimately try to see the entire pattern, but that helps by relating like concepts to each other. So that's the correlation step, sub-step of the processing stage. Then you're going to actually analyze the data. And again, this is where the Quadrivium comes in, because the Quadrivium is the quantification methodologies for the data that you have acquired in step 1, the input stage, okay, or the grammar stage. The processing stage overall enables us to learn the answer to the question why. It is to help us to understand the reason, the meaning, or the purpose behind the events that we see playing out in our world. So what is the reason for being? What is the meaning of this? Why is this like this? You will come to an understanding of those things if you have followed the process through in part 2 accurately. Then part 3 is then, what are you going to do with this understanding? Are you going to sit on it and do nothing? Are you going to praise yourself for having come to such an accurate understanding of something? Or are you actually going to do something of worthiness and effect with the information that you have accurately arrived at and understood? So this is the wisdom stage, part 3. This is what they call rhetoric in the classical Trivium method, the output phase. It's what you do with what you know. Speech and action based upon the knowledge that you've gathered and that you now have an accurate understanding of. That's what this third step is all about. And I would say without that step, what's the point of even going through the process of learning the truth? Because knowledge and understanding are ultimately meaningless unless they're actually put into action in the real world in a way that is in accordance with natural law and the respect of the rights of others. That's what we have to do with this knowledge that we've acquired through the Trivium method. So ultimately, when this is done, this is how knowledge and understanding are propagated so that real and positive change can be created in our world. That's the purpose, the entire purpose of the Trivium methodology, is to arrive at an understanding of how can we be of benefit? How can we be of assistance to the raising of consciousness of humanity? Because we understand that's really the only way that anything's ever going to change here. So what are the methods of actually doing that, of actually reaching people? Well, it's putting this threefold path to truth into action in our lives, and then speaking and acting in accordance with it. That's what the Trivium method is all about. And connected with this is the Quadrivium. This is a subset, you could look at it, or a complementary path in relation to the Trivium. And of course, it's based on the word for, as we're going to see. When we put them together, there's actually a sevenfold methodology to come to the truth. And that's what the Kabbalistic tree is all about. That is what the chakra system is all about. These are just correspondent systems that symbolically ultimately relate to a method for learning the truth. That's what it's all ultimately about. As we said on day one, you have to believe that there is such a thing as truth in order to go and set off in a journey to find it. Because you don't know what the truth is at that point. But if you don't believe that there's such a thing as truth, that makes you a solipsist, one who thinks that there is no such thing as truth at all, and they never set foot on the path of discovery. They never set foot on the path to higher consciousness. They never set foot on the path to introspection and discovery of the true self. That doesn't happen for a solipsist, okay? So this sevenfold journey is all ultimately about the self and the self's path toward truth and realization, self-realization. So let's take a look. Let's begin taking a look at the Quadrivium. The Quadrivium, as I've already said, is the quantification methodologies for information processing that plays a huge role in the step number 2 of the Trivium, okay, processing, or in the classical system, what was known as logic, and in the esoteric tradition, the understanding phase, okay? So the word Quadrivium basically breaks down into 2 etymological root words, okay? And these both are from Latin. And the first one is the Latin word quator, which means 4, okay? Quator means 4, where the first part of Quadrivium comes from, quadra, okay? So it means 4 what? Well, the second part of it is vium, V-I-U-M, and this is derived from the Latin word via, V-I-A. Via, and I'm on slide number 3 for those who are following along on the radio show page of the website. Via in Latin means way, path, or road. So just as trivium meant the 3 paths, because trivia, T-R-I, comes from tres tria in Latin, so that means 3. Quator means 4, so instead of 3 roads, the word Quadrivium simply means 4 roads. Okay, pretty simple to understand once we understand the etymology of the word through the root words from the ancient Latin language that it comes from. Ultimately, the Quadrivium is a 4-fold path to truth, just as the Trivium was a 3-fold path to truth. And we see that the name Quadrivium, very similar to Trivium, means 4-fold path, or 4 roads. That's basically what it means, just as Trivium meant 3 roads, or 3 ways. So Quadrivium could mean 4 ways. These are 4 ways of processing information, basically. And this is an ancient system, just as the Trivium is an ancient system. You could look at this as a component within the Trivium. Again, mainly for the processing stage, because these are the 4 quantification methodologies that are employed for information processing. So, slide number 4 shows you what these 4 methods for information processing and quantification are. They are arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. And just like the steps of the Trivium, grammar, logic, and rhetoric, or knowledge, understanding, and wisdom, these 4 methodologies need to be taken in that order because they increase in their complexity as you start from arithmetic and proceed through geometry, then music, then astronomy. So you can't start building a house at the top floor. You have to build a firm foundation first. And that foundation is arithmetic, which is called the mother of all the sciences, really. Mathematics is, in general, because without math, you really can't engage in any of the other sciences because you can't quantify your observations without a knowledge and understanding of mathematics. So we'll be looking at what each one of these sciences entails and how it fits into the Trivium method over the course of this show. So before we do that, we do have a caller on the line, so let's go to the phones. If you're calling in, please be patient. Stay on the line. I will get to your call. I want to take calls today. So once again, the call-in number is 866-841-1065. I look at the switchboard usually during breaks because during the show I'm looking at my notes and my slides. So be patient, stay on the line, don't get discouraged. I will get to your call. So here we go. Richard in Washington State. You are live on What on Earth is Happening. Welcome.
Yeah, Mark, I really enjoy the show, but I am going to make a challenge to you.
Sure.
Over the information that you're giving us. Yesterday on Melody's show, she had James Madison, who has written a presentation called The Declaration of Restoration.
Mm-hmm.
Secondarily, he mentioned a article that you can get over the internet, Emergent from Illusion, by Ricardo Johansson. Basically, I called in about several weeks ago and challenged you on your concept of what the Founding Fathers gave us.
Sure.
Those two examples of information tell us that the Founding Fathers gave us sovereignty. And there's 2 systems. Their sovereign system that has been totally falsified and presented to us in a poor form. Our Constitution, as we now have it, is a fraudulent document. It's not what the Founding Fathers gave us. And secondarily, we are now subject, if we choose to be, and that's our choice as individuals, in a total fraudulent system, which is our United States of America system.
Right.
So I challenge you to go to Melanie's show, and everybody also, and especially the Oracle hosts, to go to that show, find out what we're really fighting for so that we can focus on that, and then pursue that avenue of the fact that we want to educate everyone using your methods to find the truth of our sovereignty.
And I'm in agreement with you, Richard. I don't think that even in the intent of the Constitution, there was true human sovereignty put forward. Just the fact that they thought they could lay and collect taxes is proof of that to me. I'm not a constitutionalist. I don't believe in authority whatsoever. So if that's any consolation,
that's
I'm
my
much
whole point.
Yes.
You're mentioning a document that is not what the Founding Fathers gave us.
Right.
That was replaced in the late or the middle 1800s. That is not the sovereignty our Founding Fathers gave us. You need to go back and use the truth and your Trivium and Quadrivium seeking of the truth and find out, especially by seeking Melanie's show and the archives, of exactly what the Founding Fathers gave us. If you go back, learn that truth, you'll totally change your perspective about what our Founding Fathers gave us.
Interesting. I will look into that, absolutely. I want to say thanks for the call. I appreciate that.
Thank you much for pursuing the truth.
Absolutely, you got it. Okay, great call. So, absolutely, we have to understand that history has been basically rewritten by the people who are in charge right now. That's what has taken place. So Richard has a great point there, that we can't take it on face value that what the documents that we're being handed and are reading and assuming is what was the original intent of this land is what was actually in the minds of the people who came here and set up this country to ostensibly escape the tyranny that was happening from Europe. But again, you also have to take into consideration, I mentioned this over the last couple of weeks, that there were people already living here and living on this land, and a bunch of settlers came in here under the assumption that they could just settle here and turn this place into their way of life without the slightest bit of consideration by the people who were already living here and had already been here for probably hundreds, if not thousands of years before people came across the Atlantic Ocean. So I think we may be dealing with a whole lot of karmic repercussions for the way that we settled this land as well, in addition to the history having been rewritten by the victors, as you could call it. So great points there, Richard, and I will look into that information. I typed down what you were saying, and I will go to those sites and check it out. So thank you. So once again, the call-in number 866-841-1065. Feel free to call in at any time. Be patient. I will get to your call. So let's go back to the Quadrivium method and look at the 4 steps of this method. In order to understand these 4 steps and why they're important, we have to understand how this subset of information processing fits in with the trivium. So on slide number 5, what I've put forward here is, again, this 3-4-5 right triangle, which you will actually see is a big symbol in mystery school traditions and often in the occult as well. So this symbol generally represents how the 3- and 4-fold processes of the trivium and the quadrivium come together and work together in a complementary fashion. You can't have one without the other, essentially. Okay? The quadrivium would be useless without its place in the quadrivium, and the trivium would fall apart if we did not have the quantification methods of the trivium for use in the processing stage. So, the 2 angles that form the right angle, the 2 lines or sides that form the right angle of the right angle triangle in the 3-4-5 triangle represent the trivium and the quadrivium. Once again, these form a 7-fold path, okay, which 7 is a sacred number in just about every ancient or mystical tradition that I can think of, okay, including Kabbalah, including Freemasonry, including the Tarot system, including Rosicrucianism, you name it. If it is of any mystical significance, if it is any tradition that truly and deeply studies the self and attempts to unravel what is really taking place in our world, the number 7 comes up over and over and over again in astrotheology. Okay, this is a number that relates to the self because of the 7 energy vortices in the body. Okay, the chakra system, and bringing these 2 methods together helps us bridge the 5 senses and bring them all together in a focused way, such that we are truly present and paying attention. Okay, so present moment awareness plays into this hugely, because this is how we can truly come into true present moment awareness through this information and information processing system. We're going to be talking about in future weeks about activating the body truly on what we should be eating. We talked about a lot of the things we shouldn't be eating, but we're going to talk about health in a big way, how to generate health, how to stay healthy. Food is such a huge important part of our lives that it can't be understated. We are what we eat. That old aphorism is absolutely true. Okay? What we put into ourselves becomes the brain and the other building blocks of the body. And that ultimately is playing a huge role in our behaviors and our actions. So the trivium and quadrivium ultimately unite to awaken the 5 senses. And that's why that is the hypotenuse of that 3-4-5 right triangle, the 5 senses. when we put these numbers together, another mystical number emerges, the number 12. We'll talk about why that is on the other side. Looking at the Quadrivium today on the show, we saw that it was comprised of a fourfold method for the quantification of data that is amassed in step 1 of the Trivium, the grammar process. And then part 2, which is the logic process or the processing stage, is using this method, the Quadrivium, for the quantification and analysis of that data. So in slide number 4, we saw that it was comprised of arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, which we're going to look into in a few moments. And in slide number 5, we were talking about how these two methods or roads, okay, actually come together to create a bridge between all of our 5 senses to activate, you could say, the entire physical presence of our individual monad, our unit of consciousness in the all, okay, in right here in the physical world. How to be here now, how to be fully present and active. That's what this 7-fold system is ultimately about. So the Trivium locks in with the Quadrivium to activate the physical senses, the 5 senses. And that's what this 3, 4, 5 right triangle or 90-degree triangle is all about. So that's how the Quadrivium fits in with the Trivium. This 4-fold path locks together with this 3-fold path, which we've already discussed, to awaken the senses and put us on the path to truth. Now, when we add these numbers together, 3, 4, and then add 5, okay, we get the number 12. Again, we've seen the significance of the number 12 when we looked into occult numerology on past shows, when we looked into gematria. When we add 1 and 2 together, okay, we get 3, the all-powerful magic number 3 about the unification of the Trinity, thought, emotion, and action coming together in a state of unison or non-duality. We saw that the mystical number 777, this important number when it comes to the occult, because it is about the activated man or woman, I'm talking about the activated being, okay, that has ignited their thoughts, emotions, and actions and brought them together as one. This number was represented, the number 7 represented a form of completion or activation of these 3 modes of consciousness, thought, emotion, and action. If you didn't have any of them activated, the number 6 was often used as the number for incompleteness or inaction, okay? Falling short, failure, etc. So if you were in the state of consciousness of not having activated thoughts, meaning in ignorance, of not having activated emotions, meaning apathetic, and being lazy or cowardly, not acting, okay, that you were said to be in the state of the beast consciousness, which is 666. The 3 6s applied to each one of those modalities of consciousness, thought, emotion, and action. Conversely, if they were awakened in you and active and all united for the same basic purpose, you were the activated being, or the being that was in the world but not of it, was embodying the qualities of the divine, not claiming to be God, but embodying qualities that were God-like, that were divinely inspired, you could say, making a one-to-one connection with that all source and tapping its power to bring that power into oneself, okay, to get out of fear-based consciousness and truly activate the higher self. That was the 777. And once again, you add those together, you get 21, which is 3 once again, okay? Just like you add 12 together, you get 3. It's the same thing. When this process is activated in a living being, the Trivium, Quadrivium, and 5 senses coming together, then he is activated in the trinity within himself or herself. Okay? Thought, emotion, and action come into unison. This is a method for doing that. Okay, so again, this is all about solutions. All the shows you're going to be hearing from here on into the future are solutions-oriented approaches. We already looked at mind control. We already looked at the dominators' methodologies. Now we're looking at how to free ourselves from their methods. And these are the methods that we can employ to actually free ourselves. This is why people were forbidden to read. They were forbidden to eclectically gather data. They were forbidden to hold the same types of books that their masters or owners in a slavery system were allowed to have. Slaves throughout time were forbidden from reading. Slaves throughout time were forbidden from using the Trivium method. This is a well-occulted method, and it unfortunately has been removed from the education system. And we need to get it back into our education system, or we need to get our kids out of the schools that won't teach people this way of learning, because this is the method for knowing how to know anything, really. That's what it is. It's learning how to think is what this is ultimately about. And that's why they want to take this method and occult it, hide it from people's view so that they can't learn how to think. And if you don't know how to think, you're going to be willing to buy whatever lies come down the pike, because you're not going to be able to apply these methods for removing contradictions and quantifying your data set to come to an accurate understanding of what's taking place around you. That's what this is all geared toward doing, toward putting those skills into the hands of people so that they cannot be duped anymore, so that they can do fact-checking and data checking to understand, is this accurate? Is this true? So that's how the Quadrivium fits into this whole big picture. And it's important to understand, and it's also important to understand how there are occult connotations to all of this, and how through symbol they basically encoded this. And again, this 3, 4, 5 right triangle, you will see it in a lot of different traditions, but most of all, the number one place you'll see it is depicted in Freemasonic symbolism. So let's actually get into now what the Quadrivium method actually is all about. So the Quadrivium, once again, is arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy in that order. Again, this can't be emphasized enough. If you take these out of order and you don't look at the mastery of one of these topics first as a prerequisite, okay, you're trying to eat your sandwich before you make it. You're trying to build the top floor of a house before you build the foundation, and there's no strength in that. Okay, there's no empowerment in that. All right, and as a matter of fact, it's quite impossible if you think about those things. So it's impossible to take these out of order. They have to be looked at in the order that they're laid down in this four-method stepwise process: arithmetic first, geometry second, music third, astronomy fourth. Now, in this little chart that I've put together in slide number 6, we're going to look at what each one of these sciences are, and we're going to relate them to esoteric concepts as well. Because again, this is not just about the left brain aspect of things. Okay, the Quadrivium itself does employ the left brain to a very great extent, but this is also about the fourfold method of uniting our internal elements, or the components of ourselves. Okay, and that has to be done for an overarching purpose, which is the advancement of spirit, which is the all-important fifth element. Again, this 3 and 4 come together with the 5, okay? The 5 is a huge symbol, the 5-pointed star. We looked at the symbol of the pentagram in its positive aspect as being the spirit ruling over the 4 material world elements: earth, air, water, and fire. We're going to relate these sciences to the 4 elements and help to understand, in an effort to understand how these need to be bridged with and combined with spirit. Okay, these are all for the advancement of spirit ultimately. Okay, so the first method we'll look at is arithmetic. And I hear the break music coming in. Today is Sunday, November 27th, 2011. I'm your host, Mark Passio. My website, whatonearthishappening.com. The call-in number for the show, 866-841-1065. I hope to be taking some calls this hour, so call in and get in the queue. And after we break down the Quadrivium method, we will be taking your calls, and let's jump right back into this. So here we go. The 4 steps of the Quadrivium. The first science is arithmetic, also known as basic mathematics, okay? This is referred to as the mother of all sciences because without math, you really can't engage in other scientific methods because this is the basic means for quantification of data. So what arithmetic simply is the study of quantity involving the combination of numbers through the operations of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. This is just also known as basic math. Everyone knows what arithmetic is. What I've put underneath here is that arithmetic or basic mathematics is pure construct. Okay, it is abstraction in itself. So we're not actually talking about physical things. Numbers are abstractions, basically. Yes, we can say we have an amount of something, but that number in and of itself is an abstraction. It exists in the mind, the construct of the mind. So this is about as non-physical as it gets, okay? We're engaging in abstract concepts. We're engaging in constructs that take place really only in the mind. That's what number actually is, and number theory. So it's important to keep in mind that this is probably the most ethereal of all of the methods of the Quadrivium. And as such, I have ascribed the 4 elements to the 4 methods of the Trivium, okay? Of the Quadrivium, I should say. The Trivium, again, the threefold path, grammar, logic, and rhetoric, is about input, processing, and output of data. This quantification method, known as the Quadrivium, we can relate each one of these to one of the 4 basic elements. And as air is related to the intellect, okay, the pure realm of abstraction and dealing with constructs, air is the most appropriate to ascribe to the step of the Quadrivium that is arithmetic, that is the basic foundational step, okay? Now, once again, you can't go to geometry unless you have an understanding of arithmetic, because to deal with geometric concepts, you're going to need to be able to do basic math. Okay, if you need to add angles together, okay, if you need to add line lengths or the lengths of a polygon together, you need math in order to find out any of the correct answers to those questions. So if you're going to do mathematical operations, if you're going to do geometry operations that involve finding area or finding volume, math is a prerequisite. You can't do any of that without mathematics or arithmetic. So again, this is the foundation upon which all the others are built. And as we'll see as we move forward, really, ultimately, the other 3 methods of the Quadrivium are built upon arithmetic and are a form of arithmetic themselves. So you're listening to What on Earth is Happening. Today on the show, we're talking about the Quadrivium. Methods of quantification in the processing stage of the Trivium method. So we're looking at arithmetic, the science of numbers, basically, okay? It's basic mathematics, dealing with the combinations of numbers in order to quantify things. And this is the root of science, basically. If we don't have this, we can't really engage in other scientific methodologies because we won't know how to quantify our data set. And that's extremely important. The question of how much is more important than we realize. We need to be able to put a overall measurement of value upon anything. And this not only includes the physical things, this includes things that are of esoteric significance. What is of value? How much value can we ascribe to this, to spend our time on it, to pay our attention to it, and so forth? So numbers, really, when it comes down to it, are the basis of everything. Hand in hand with that, form is also the basis of everything, which brings us to our next method in the Quadrivium, which is geometry. So this is step number 2, meaning that the prerequisite for it is arithmetic. Once you have an understanding of how arithmetic works and functions, and you could do it and you have mastered it, then you can understand geometry. This is why we don't get geometry lessons until high school or maybe late grade school, okay, in any real sort of way. Of course, it's touched on, but later in grade school, you'll start with geometry classes. You won't do that until you have an understanding of mathematics, and that's addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, because you need all of those operations in order to do geometry. This is basic common sense, and everybody pretty much knows this. So what is geometry? Again, the word is important because it means the measure of Earth. Okay? So again, this is related to Earth in an esoteric sense, which we will get to. Let's talk about what geometry itself is. It's a branch of mathematics that is concerned with shape, size, relative position, and the properties of space. Okay? So we're talking about the quantification of form now, which again, we can't do without arithmetic. So this is understanding forms, and form underlies everything as well. So we could look at this as the study of the physical, because we're moving out away from the area of pure abstraction or just constructural ways of thinking, which is basic numbers, and we're getting into form, which forms actually do exist in the physical reality, the 3D reality in which we live. So this is less of an abstraction, geometry. Now we're actually dealing with measurements of things in the physical world. Okay, now we can do it purely in an abstraction on paper or in a computer, but we could also engage in geometrical constructs, methods in the physical reality in which we live. They apply to the physical world. So again, you'll see that it's defined as a branch of mathematics, okay, which means it is arithmetic in and of itself, but it is applied to something. What it is applied to is the measurement of space. So it is arithmetic applied to space, or the arithmetic of space, as I put there in parentheses on slide number 6, the chart on slide number 6 with the podcast or the radio show. Earth is what this deals with, because that's what geometry actually means, the measure of Earth. Okay? Again, measure is related with the concept of Ma'at in the Egyptian tradition, the Earth Mother. Okay? She is the spirit of justice and truth. Okay? The G in the middle of the compasses and square in Freemasonry is often said to refer to geometry. And it is one of the things, as we talked about, that G corresponds to and relates to, because it is about how we can reshape ourselves in order to come into harmony with that great mother. Okay? The one who brings justice, the one who is connected to the source of everything. Truth itself is what we're trying to align ourselves with. That's what the whole esoteric tradition of Freemasonry is about, as we saw in past podcasts. So geometry means the measure of the earth. And in looking at it in that sense, this is it most certainly corresponds with the element of earth in the system of earth, air, water, and fire, the four material elements that we have to combine under the spirit or ether, the fifth element, the quintessence. So again, the numbers 3, 4, and 5, again, playing a huge vital role in the entire Trivium method. Okay, the Trivium being the 3, the Quadrivium being the 4, and then the unification of these coming together in our 5 senses to activate and awaken them. This is what the awakening process is all ultimately about. We say people are asleep, they need to wake up. Well, this is the method for truly awakening oneself, understanding these disciplines and learning how to think. We're going to talk about later on the show the science of Hermeticism. We looked at the Hermetic tradition when we looked into natural law, and we're going to look at the 5 basic steps of that tradition and how this relates to the Trivium and Quadrivium to awaken the 5 senses. Because that's ultimately what we're trying to do, is wake people up. Take them from being unconscious, which is asleep, to being conscious, which is awake. So the third branch of the Quadrivium, the third quantification methodology, is music. Okay? Music, people will not generally think of as a science, but it absolutely is. Okay? And it was of critical importance to teach music, especially to children who were still in formative and developmental years and were still learning and learning ultimately how to think. Without music as a balance to a lot of these other more hard and left brain methods of science, the balance becomes lost. Okay, music is so important. It's played such a huge role in my life. I have often attempted to try to find, before we get into the definition of music and relating it to the esoteric, one of the material elements, we were looking at slide number 6, which contains the 4 steps of the Quadrivium and relates them to the esoteric elements of the material realm. We already took a look at the first 2. I'm going to take a look at the second 2, hopefully, in this segment, and then we're going to start getting to some of your calls. We looked at arithmetic as being the mother of these sciences, without which you couldn't do any of the other methods of the Quadrivium, because it is the ultimate method for the quantification of any data set is basic math. So that is a prerequisite for all of these. We looked at geometry as being the study of form and shape and size, relative position. We called it the arithmetic of space. And as we gave arithmetic the characteristics of the quality of air, we assigned earth to geometry. It can be looked at as the mother of these sciences, or the prima materia in a way. It is a starting point in understanding form and function. So we assigned earth to the science of geometry. Now we were looking at music, and before the break I said that one of the key factors that seems to play a huge role in whether someone is conscious, and this isn't to say that everyone who enjoys music is necessarily conscious and highly awake, but I did notice in those who were, music plays a huge role in their lives, and often they have participated in making music, in creating music. And I find that very, very interesting and inspiring because, again, music has played such a gigantic role in my life, and I don't think that I necessarily would have come to the level of consciousness and awareness that I did hadn't it been for the creative outlet that music offered me in my life. because ultimately we're here to be co-creators with the divine. And music is a big, big part of taking part in that process, as is art, as is creating artwork. So these are two huge methods of awakening, of helping to spur the process of awakening, I should say, that I haven't really touched too much on in the show, but I think that at least should be said. And I would suggest to people to do a social experiment, to just find some of the more conscious people that you know and find out what role music played in their lives. And I guarantee you will see a significant correlation with the people who are awake and whether they engaged in and actually took a creative role in making music, and in general, whether music played a significant role in their lives or not. So what is music? It is an art form which employs vibration, rhythm, dynamics, and the interplay between sound and silence as its mediums for expression. So most people don't consider this a science, but ultimately, if we looked at it, every one of these ways that music expresses is a form of time, or the breakdown of time into smaller units, into quantities, okay? Because without time, there can't be vibration, okay? Without time, there can't be rhythm, okay? You can't have an interplay between sound and silence without interspersing them in time, throughout time. This, what we consider a linear progression of events, so that all events don't happen at once. Okay, it is separation in the sense of what we consider past, present, and future. Ultimately, we understand from a higher consciousness point of view that there is only the present moment, that there is only the now. Okay, but music is created in the now. Okay, when you're playing a single note, that's happening now, and then you move past that individual present moment, things progress, and then you play another note. And then that note that was, that vibration that was, passes into what we call the past. Okay? And then you keep going along with that flow of creating this dynamic interplay between sound and silence, and we ultimately call that music. That's what tempo is. Okay? The changes in time that we experience through the creation of music. All right? Dynamics is whether things get loud or soft. Okay? And that changes throughout time. Every one of these concepts is related to time. So as we saw, all the concepts in geometry are related to space and form. Well, music could be considered the science of time. But specifically, it's the quantification of the science of time. So that's arithmetic. Arithmetic is the science of quantification. Okay? So what I've called music here is simply the arithmetic of time. Okay? It is number applied to time, whereas number applied to space describes geometry. So that could be a heady way of looking at music. But indeed, that is how the ancients saw the system of music in general, and why they placed so much importance on it, because they understood the present moment awareness and how music plays a huge part in that. If you want to be truly present in the present moment and aware of what's going on around you, play in a band and understand how much you go into the zone, as they say. When you are fully present and you become one with the vibration, you become one with the song. And that's what we're ultimately all here to do, to become one with the one song, the universe. Okay? The one change or a vibratory energy that is taking place all around us, that we are part of. It's to recognize our oneness with that. So music helps to come into the present moment. Okay? And understanding music is not really truly possible without first understanding number and form, because that's ultimately what we're dealing with. That's what music is all about. Music is all about form through vibration. Just look at some cymatics videos and you'll understand what I mean, that sound is the underlying force behind all form. So maybe I'll post a couple of cymatics videos with this podcast. CYMATICS, cymatics. A very, very interesting study. If you haven't looked into it, you'll really come to an appreciation of how important vibratory energy is when it comes to what we see through shape and form, and color for that matter. It's all about frequency and vibration. And music and its understanding and its study can play a huge role in unlocking those higher-minded concepts and helping us to bring them down to the realm of usability in the material realm. And as I said, one of the biggest components of that is helping us to stay rooted in the present moment, because it's all about time. It is the arithmetic of time, as a matter of fact. Now let's look at the fourth and final method of the trivium, and then we'll go to some calls, and then I'm going to maybe wrap things up today, again, talking about how this relates in with the Hermetic tradition, as we had been talking about in the stage when we discussed natural law. We're discussing the Quadrivium, and we were on the fourth step of the Quadrivium, the fourth and final science that the Quadrivium entails for the quantification of the data that we have acquired through the first step in the trivium method, grammar, and that we wish to process accurately to come to an understanding of, so that we can then do something with that knowledge that we have acquired. So, science number 4 is astronomy. And actually, before we look into this, I want to just relate one more thing about music, and that is that this is the emotional quality. This is what you could call the sacred feminine of these 4 sciences of the Quadrivium. And again, that's the one that truly brings balance to the equation. Music would be water, okay, the higher feminine element. And again, music is all related with flow, just like water, okay? The flow of time, the flow of energy. That's what music is all ultimately about. It's one of the reasons they want to create so much discordance with the kind of energy they're pumping out there through radionics, cell phone towers, harp, chemtrails, etc. These are all things to disrupt the flow of music within us, to set our vibration off. Okay, so discord continues, both within us and in our interactions with others. So, moving toward the fourth science of astronomy, we understand that what astronomy is the science that deals with celestial objects. Okay, the science of the gods, so to speak, the objects out there beyond the earth. Wanting to understand how the movement of these objects works. Okay? Their geometries, their music, so to speak. Okay? The natural science that deals with the study of celestial objects such as stars, planets, comets, nebulae, and galaxies. So, this has been called the music of the spheres. This has been called the science of the gods. On this chart here, I referred to it as the arithmetic of time and space. We're quantifying the movements through time of celestial objects that have positions in space. And understanding that they have a rhythm, that they have a cycle, that they have a music. It is a symphony. So you need to understand music, geometry, and arithmetic before you can understand astronomy. That's why truly the study of astronomy will be balanced with an understanding of music, because music is the feminine to the masculine of astronomy, the macrocosmic world, the higher realm. Okay? This is alchemical fire that we're talking about, the fire that ignites the universe of the stars. Okay? So I called it the arithmetic of time and space. It could be simply referred to as the music of the spheres, as it has often been called. So this is the fourth and final method of the trivium. And, I look back on this chart and I realize when I was growing up, these were the things that I considered valuable, important, and interesting to learn when I was in school. And unfortunately, one of the biggest parts that plays a huge does not play a huge role in modern education, as it did in classic education, is music. Schools totally cut back their music programs to emphasize more on reading, writing, arithmetic. Okay, now arithmetic, of course, is important, as it's one of the foundational steps of the trivium. But when we place too much emphasis on the left brain methodologies and take away one of the all-important forms, which is music, from the educational system, we're keeping our children in a left brain prison, which is what I'm going to talk about in the last segment, is how this entire system works to help balance the brain if it is used correctly and wisely. Okay, the trivium and quadrivium together is a technique for balancing the brain. And I'll explain how that is. And I'm also going to relate it a little bit, again, as I said, to the Hermetic tradition of initiation. But before that, let's take a couple of calls. Here we go. Caller from Ohio, you are live on What on Earth is Happening. Welcome.
Hi.
How are you?
Sir?
Yes.
This is a great call. I stumbled across this because I originally dove into the call Freeman Radio with Dean Clifford about the trust law and stuff, and
yes.
Then I kind of stumbled across truth frequency.
Excellent.
This is great information. It's totally right in my line because I'm totally familiar with. That's why when I was a kid growing up, they forced me from being ambidextrous to being just writing with my right hand, to force me to be a logical thinker.
Right.
And the math and the geometry and stuff like that wasn't taught to me in school, yet I received a diploma that says I'm graduated. So I totally resonate with all this information.
Sure.
Yeah,
the reason that they make children write with the right hand, or at least used to force that on them, is because they want you in the left brain in the education system, because the left brain controls the right side of the body. So if you are left-handed, you have a more open and receptive right brain modality, which puts you into a truly intuitive and creative state. That's exactly right, sir. And I'm naturally left-handed and was always left-handed from the time I was extremely young. And fortunately for me, no one ever forced right-handedness onto me. So it's something I've often looked into as well, to see who has a more open and receptive right brain, which is so critically important. And it often makes me wonder why so few people are left-handed or born left-handed. And even though the few that are, they look at that as a bad thing and try to condition that out of a child.
Yeah, well, I'm totally in tune with, getting in tune with the universal consciousness of what's going on. I am waking up fast. So, I stumbled across Vedic math, which is heart math, which totally works the feminine and the masculine part of the brain, and it opens you up. So if I go on these calls every Sunday, well, this probably helped me out and steer me in the direction I need, because I'm just trying to get truth and freedom when it comes to the system that's trying to run my life.
That's right.
And get free from, like I said, I originally came down to this because they're playing a right brain game on us, or whatever kind of logical brain game on us in the court system and all that. So Do you speak about a lot of that stuff also?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I did.
Trust law?
Yeah, not specifically trust law, but how admiralty law, which is what we have in the United States, varies widely from natural law. So you can hear that in
I know what that is.
in my news section. I've done a few interviews on some other shows. We haven't gotten into that on my program too much as of yet. I've touched upon it, but if you listen to some of the interviews I've done recently in the news section of my website, you will find a couple of shows where I get in depth on admiralty law.
Oh yeah, I'm familiar with it because the admiralty law runs the world.
That's right.
I mean, it's UCC, so I'm in tune with that. But it's just, I think I'm going to be coming to this call every Sunday. This is totally in line with what I need to do because with Vedic math, I need to retrain myself with the math, geometry, and then the music, sacred geometry, because that has everything to do with the pi codes inside of us,
Sure.
With opening up the as above, so below, because I am part of the universe. We are all one.
And who knows what that could do for transforming our creative potentials. We have the ability to actually rewrite ourselves and make ourselves over again. We're not locked into any form or any specific function. We can choose to create a different destiny for ourselves, and that's one of the methods for doing it. Let me direct everybody's attention to the slides again on the website. We looked at slide number 6. To slide 7, I go back to the Trivium and just reiterate that it is about ultimately information and the accurate input, processing, and outputting of that information, just like a computer that is working properly would deal with information. If any one of these things is off, the computer is basically not doing its job properly. And the human brain acts as the central processing unit of the human body computer, if you will. And if it's not operating in efficiency or in balance, we're going to have junk being output, which means behaviors that are not conducive to what we really want to see for a peaceful and prosperous existence here on Earth. So the Trivium can act as a fulcrum point or a method of balance for the human brain. And I want to help people to understand how this entire process works in the brain. See, the first step of the Trivium process is the input. And in order for that to work properly, we can't have a non-functioning right brain hemisphere. So the right brain has to be somewhat receptive. This is part of the problem with why people won't take in any of this new information at all. Once the brain has become so engrossed in certain electrochemical activity, it almost hardwires that way. That's how mind control works. It's trying to hardwire a set of pathways into the brain, get the pathways functioning a certain way and calcify it, almost turn it into stone. Symbolically, not really, but in other words, when certain neural activity takes place chronically, we get used to that and almost addicted to the way that is. And therefore, if that process isn't engaging the right brain, because we've always been in this left brain prison, okay, the right brain's not going to be receptive to new information. It's going to reject it without non-judgmental collection of that information, which is what part 1 of the Trivium is all about, the grammar stage, okay, the input stage. The right brain has to be somewhat receptive, and it has to basically allow the ego to step aside with its likes, dislikes, preferences, opinions, etc., and just take the information in without filtering it. That's part 1. Part 2 is the filtration process that is the logic step, okay, the processing step. This is the part that we're really engaging the left brain. And as you saw, yes, the Quadrivium is largely a left brain methodology, set of methodologies. And I would say with the exception of music, music is definitely a right brain method because it involves so much creative energy, okay? That helps us to come to an accurate understanding of things. The problem is, in the educational system, the way it's set up today, the right brain is almost excluded from this process entirely. And at a very young age, they're giving us a data set that is incomplete, that has completely walled off certain entire chunks of reality. It has firewalled off. And what that does is that puts us into a firewalled, walled off brain state that only engages the left brain with the information that has been deemed acceptable by this control system. And therefore we're trapped in this endless processing mode without any connection to the right brain modalities. See, what the goal is of part one, the input stage, is to feed the totality of the information we've taken into the left brain so that then the processing of that information can begin. If we don't understand the steps for processing, which is what the quadrivium is ultimately about, okay, it plays a big role in that, we're not going to come out with an accurate analysis, which is understanding. Okay, that's why I put quadrivium on this left side. It is the processing stage. To arrive at understanding is what the purpose of it is. Only then can we then feed it back to the right brain, which answers the question why and what, for what purpose and for what reason ultimately is this information, have I come to these conclusions regarding it, and then how am I going to allow those conclusions to guide my actions? Okay, this is all right brain material. After the processing stage is finished, you have to make a reconnection with the right mind again, which is where the process began, the right brain hemisphere. And it doesn't just go totally to the right brain and then leave out all the logic that you understood. It combines them at that point. It bridges them. So that's why the output is holistic in its function. The output, the rhetoric, or the wisdom is what we do with what we know once we have arrived at an accurate understanding. And that is a holistic process. It is neither left nor right brain if one has truly used this methodology correctly. It is holistic functioning reasoning, which is what wisdom actually is, because that's what is guiding our actions. We are now acting on accurate understanding, and that is whole-brained intelligence, not just left-brain intellect. So with that being said, I just want to touch on the 5 steps of Hermetic initiation and how this relates to the Trivium and Quadrivium. In Hermeticism, one of the most ancient mystical traditions, okay, for awakening a human being through the process of initiation, the 5 steps were stop lying, especially to yourself. Okay, that's what understanding what's really going on in the world is about. Get out of your state of denial. Okay, stop dreaming. And this doesn't mean don't think of ways of making the future better. It means stop existing in cognitive dissonance of seeing one way that the world actually is right now and thinking that it's some other way, or trying to lie to yourself and saying it's some other way that it isn't. Stop dreaming about what you think the world is or ought to be and accept it for what it is and then do something about it. Okay? The 3rd step is learn how to think, which is what the Trivium is all ultimately about. Right there in the middle of the 5-step initiatory method in the ancient wisdom traditions, in the ancient mystical traditions, was learn how to think. That's the middle of this process. If you don't learn how to think, you're never going to come to accurate understanding about anything. And the Trivium was employed at this step in the process of initiation. You have to stop lying. You got to want to know the truth. You got to stop dreaming. Get out of your cognitive dissonance about what you think is going on, and then really learn what really is going on. So then that's how to think, okay, using the Trivium and Quadrivium methods. And ultimately, the 4th and 5th steps were truly live in the present moment, which we already referred to today, talked about that that's what part of the Quadrivium helps us to do, and to activate the physical body, the importance of food, which we're going to be bringing up very soon on this show and have some guests come on to talk about that, and how to really generate the health and maintain the health of the body and the brain. I'll leave it there for today. We took in a lot of information. Let's go to the calls. I see we have our good friend Bob Tuscan on the line, who's going to be a guest on next week's show. Bob, you can take us out. What do you have for us today, my friend? Bob, are you there? getting ready to bring on our special guest. So here we go. Jan Irvin is the host of the popular Gnostic Media Podcast, a show that focuses on utilizing the classical 7 liberal arts of the Trivium and Quadrivium, bringing together leading independent and academic researchers to discuss ancient mysteries, education, politics, economics, and much more. Jan's websites are gnosticmedia.com and triviumeducation.com. Welcome to What on Earth is Happening, Mr. Jan Irvin.
Hi, Mark. Thanks, and glad to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. You've been a big influence for me, and your work with the Trivium really stands out amongst people who research this important topic. So why don't we start by having you tell the listeners a little bit about your background and how you learned about the Trivium method and its vital importance in a real education.
Well, let's see. My background a little bit. I got into researching all of this. I suppose originally I got into it through working with Jack Hare and the California Hemp Initiative back in the early 90s. And we worked on Prop 215 for medical marijuana that helped to legalize medical marijuana here in California and now across a third of the country. And Jack Hare's who led me into researching entheogens and psychedelics, or psychedelics as they're commonly called. And in December 2005, I published my first book, Astrotheology and Shamanism, followed up with a DVD, The Pharmacratic Inquisition, in 2007. And then my book, The Holy Mushroom, Evidence of Mushrooms in Judeo-Christianity, in 2008. I got into researching the Trivium because in October 2008, I launched the Gnostic Media Podcast, which was something that was sitting around and an idea that I had been working toward for about a year before I actually launched the show. And it was at my first year anniversary of the show was when I first had Gino Denning on, who is my mentor in the Trivium, and brought that information to me. And because of my research in my book, Astrotheology and Shamanism, and all of the reoccurring sevens that kept coming up in that research, the 7 ancient planets, the 7 chakras, the 7 stars of the Pleiades, excuse me, all of these sevens kept coming up, including the 7 liberal arts. But I couldn't quite figure out at the time how to approach the topic for that book. So when Gino Denning approached me, he had sent me an email with a long description of what the Trivium was and all of this stuff, and sort of baited me with it to see if I would show interest and follow up with him, which as soon as I saw his email and started going through it, it was one of those epiphany moments of, aha, this is what I've been looking for and how to connect it all. So I immediately emailed Gino Denning back and asked him if he would be able to present this information on my show, which of course he replied and said that he would be, which is now the famous Gino Denning Trivium, Quadrivium, and Kabbalah series on the Gnostic Media Podcast, episodes 49, 50, and 51, that have really become the backbone of everything that we do at Gnostic Media, and for that matter, at the Tragedy and Hope website, which is Richard Andrew Groves, and he runs the Peace Revolution podcast, which we all contribute to. So all of these things, all of these projects that we've since taken up, all incorporate the Trivium and Quadrivium because it is the foundation of gathering knowledge and understanding information, removing the contradictions before you pass that information on to others. So obviously this is essential to making sure that we're passing on clear and cogent information to others so that we don't infect our downline. And we think that is essential because so much of the media and information being distributed out there is awash in misinformation and disinformation and just things that people get on ideas that people get on a whim or that they channel without ever fact checking anything. And so We're trying to get people back to the core of verifying information before they pass it on to others, sort of a mental antivirus system, because bad information, when you pass that on, it's the same as passing on a virus, and you waste everyone's time in your downline from there. So we feel that it's essential to help people or empower people with the proper tools so that they can get through all of the nonsense out there in life that's being thrown at them, all of the disinformation, and be able to sort of find their way through to, and the Trivium being the lighthouse sort of in the darkness there.
That's a great point, Jan. And I think one of the most important things to keep in mind is when you talk about removing the contradictions from information before passing it along, that's so important. One of the best definitions for truth that I've ever heard anyone give is truth, when taken into oneself, is that which can do no harm. So that's really what you're attempting to do with the Trivium method, get people to basically boil information down to its core essence so that we can get at what is actually true, remove the fallacies from that information, and then in passing it along, when other people take it into themselves, they can do no harm with that information. They can only generate order and good with that information.
Exactly. And go ahead.
Yes, no, go ahead.
Oh, I wasn't sure if you wanted me to add something to that, but yeah, you're
Sure.
exactly right on that. The Trivium logic, or grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and in fact, if people go to the triviumeducation.com website, they can see the Trivium logo there, which is sort of a triangle with truth in the middle, surrounded by consciousness. And what the Christians did, and if you look at old Christian artwork and things like that, they'll take the Trivium and the 3 points, grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and what they'll do is they'll put God in the middle rather than truth. But we think that this really usurps the power of the Trivium, because rather than looking for truth in and of itself, you have to put your dogma, your religious dogma, before truth. So by putting truth there, we are looking for truth no matter what our predisposed dogmatic beliefs are, and which it forces us to, or allows us to be able to question the veracity of certain things, of religious beliefs and things like that, whereas if we put God or Deuce in the middle, whatever it may be, that prevents us from doing so, because we think, okay, well, I arrived at God, and here's this Bible that tells me what to think from here, so that's the end of my search. And by by putting truth in the middle, truth becomes the ultimate search rather than some predisposed religious belief.
I couldn't agree more, and I think that's what this is all about, ladies and gentlemen. Solutions-oriented approaches. How do we need to shift our focus when it comes to teaching ourselves, when it comes to true learning and a true classical education that is different from the indoctrination system that we've been given as part of the public school system here in the Western world, and in fact throughout the world for that matter. So Jan, you were one of the great speakers at the Free Your Mind conference back in April. You spoke on Sunday, the second day of the Free Your Mind conference, and you gave a presentation there which absolutely blew a lot of people away. It was called the Trivium Meme. I thought it was one of the hardest hitting presentations at the Free Your Mind conference. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about what that presentation was about?
Well, it was really excuse me, it was really about the Trivium itself, and just trying to give people an understanding of gathering knowledge and information and understanding how mind control systems work, and using the Trivium as a method to see through those mind control systems and properly process information. We're trying to teach people how to install a system into their own minds that properly protects them from bad information. Like you mentioned, the logical fallacies, being able to spot the fallacies and things like that. Unfortunately, we didn't have the time to go into some of the logical fallacies during that lecture, but it was really just, a foundational understanding of the Trivium in as short and quick a time as we could possibly give it. And I apologize for stuttering so much for those of you who've managed to sit through the video on that.
Oh, no, I think it is a fantastic presentation, and I think everybody should definitely check that presentation out if you have not seen it already. You can go to freeyourmindconference.com, click on Jan Irvin's name under the speaker list, and watch the entire video for free. It's posted up to YouTube as well. And
right, and it's also on the Gnostic Media page under videos or under Trivium study if people can get there quickly as well.
Great. All of the videos on the Free Your Mind conference have been posted and are free for everyone's viewing and downloading. If you haven't checked that site out, be sure to do so. Jan Irvin, once again, one of the great speakers at that conference. Let's talk a little bit about logical fallacies, Jan. I'd like to talk about the word fallacy itself for people who may not know the etymology of the word. It derives from a Latin word, fallo, a verb, fallo, F-A-L-L-O, fallere. And this word means in Latin, the meaning of the word is to deceive.
Yeah, to deceive or to lie, correct.
That's right. This gives a whole new meaning to the term fall of man. You know, people think of the fall of man as some sort of a degradation that happened to man's nature, quote unquote. But if we look at it in this way, maybe it's a grand deception that has been pulled over his eyes. It's the deception of man.
And well, it's interesting that you should say that. And in fact, I heard you in your last week's show mention my comment to you about the fall of man with the tree of knowledge. So before we get into the fallacies, would you like me to read to the audience what I read to you last week?
Absolutely. Go right ahead.
All right. Studying the Kabbalah, it's interesting that the tree, when fallen knowledge first, which is the da'at position, is not seen. This is absolutely the state of affairs today. Logic before grammar, understanding before knowledge. What can one possibly understand before they know what they're attempting to understand? Who, what, where, when equals knowledge. Logic is understanding. It answers why, but only after knowledge. Then we gain clarity and wisdom in our rhetoric. The tree of knowledge is the tree of life, is the Kabbalistic tree. And this is coming from page 161 in Daniel Feldman's book on the Kabbalah. The Sephirah, knowledge first, is always there, but in a fallen state, we do not see it. And then continuing on from me, so if mankind has fallen, his position of knowledge first, the da'at position, has fallen to earth. Therefore, it has fallen out of use. Man has fallen out of knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. Therefore, he cannot see the quote-unquote kingdom. Is it not irony? Oh, wait, and this is something that, it is said that the Kabbalah, you don't start studying it in Jewish tradition until you're 40 years old. And I put in my notes here that, is it not irony that I've had Feldman's book for 2 years before I started studying it, now that I'm 40 years old? Now, the Trivium, Quadrivium, and Kabbalah make up a functioning system, just as grammar, logic, and rhetoric make up a functioning system within the Trivium, and within the Quadrivium, mathematics, geometry, music, and astronomy make up a system. Well, so it is with the Trivium and Quadrivium and Kabbalah together, making up another level of the functioning system. So knowledge has fallen from first. It's fallen to literally the anus position, or the foundation position in the Kabbalah. And on page 101 of Feldman's book, when the Sephirah knowledge first position falls and becomes Sephirah kingdom, it takes the gate bet 1 with it, which thereby connects the kingdom only to Sephirah foundation below, end quote. And a fallen tree has a trunk. In a fallen tree, knowledge first falls to the small phase position. Man has fallen out of the garden to earth. He falls from a position of the world of Atziluth in the logic and rhetoric down to the world of the Yetzirah, because he is not thinking by asking who, what, where, when first. Knowledge first. So he loses it and he falls. So, in other words, man has the fall, just like you pointed out. So those who put their logic before their grammar are causing the fall, done intentionally to them, and they're ignorant at that. They have fallen from the tree of knowledge. And then
This gives a whole new take to the concept of being expelled from the garden.
Exactly.
The original fall of man, right?
Exactly what I'm getting at here. So the Trivium and Quadrivium and Kabbalah are a higher level functioning system, just as grammar, logic, and rhetoric make up the Trivium, and arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy make up the Quadrivium. And let's see. And then just a couple of side notes that I put here. When I've finished filling out the tree, I have gained knowledge, understanding of wisdom, which should open up the crown gate. Those who do evil purposefully use the tree to keep people in the lower levels so that they can manipulate them for personal gain. But this brings the whole of the world down with them.
That is the entire role of the occultation of knowledge to begin with. The occult in general is about secrecy, is about keeping secrets, keeping knowledge from people so that they cannot develop it into understanding.
Right, and the irony of that is these people that do that, they not only keep those who they wish to control below them, but they keep the whole of humanity, including themselves, from reaching a higher state.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
So in their own ignorance and selfishness, not only are they hurting the rest of us, which is all they and their narrow-minded perception can see, but they're hurting themselves. And that's the pathetic part, is they think that they're one-upping all of us in their own self-gain, but they're literally hurting themselves and everyone else as a whole.
Exactly. Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself. I mean, that is exactly what these dark occultists are doing in their short-sightedness. You put it beautifully. I'm your host, Mark Passio. My website, whatonearthishappening.com. Our special guest today is Jan Irvin of triviumeducation.com. In the last segment, we were getting into some of the esoteric meanings of the fall of man and how this relates to man being deceived and falling from a place of knowing, a place of having knowledge, and that knowledge being occulted and kept hidden from humanity as a whole. So, Jan, let's get back into what led us into that brief aside there when we got into some esoteric concepts and the Kabbalah as related with the Trivium method. We were really starting to talk about logical fallacies because we brought up the derivation of the word fallacy. So why don't you talk a little bit about logical fallacies and how you can apply this technique of spotting logical fallacies to actually filter the information that is out there?
Well, logical fallacies, as we mentioned previously, is from the Latin fallare, which is to lie or to deceive. So there's probably about 22 main fallacies that are known, but there are lists out there that include maybe 90 up to 200 different fallacies. But because humans are deceptive creatures, there's probably never going to be an end to the new methods of lying to one another that people will come up with. So it is important to be able to name the fallacies because having the explicit knowledge of the fallacies enables you to take, when somebody's lying to you and having a funny feeling about it, to going to having explicit knowledge where you're able to identify the exact type of lie that someone has used against you, and you're able to express to someone else that lie and how it was used against you. So and effectively, when you are able to name each of the fallacies by name and explain what they are, this very act of having them memorized gives you explicit knowledge of the many different ways that are typically used to lie to you, or, and to other people. So, in other words, the better you get at this explicit knowledge of the fallacies, the better you'll be able to protect yourself and others downstream from you. And not only that, but the fallacies are not just used to catch lies coming in through your five senses from others, but it's also used to filter these same lies or fallacies out from your own thoughts before you spread information on to others. So it's equally important in two directions. And so to start off with some of the most common fallacies, most people have heard of an ad hominem fallacy. So like, let's say that, I'm talking about the Trivium, and somebody comes up and says, well, Jan, anything that he says can't be true because he's just a neo-pinky liberal commie. Instead of dealing with the information I'm presenting, what they'll do is they'll throw attacks at me as a way to divert attention away from the information, and rather dealing with the specific information presented, they'll just use these attacks. They'll call somebody homosexual or a Republican, or because this person is Christian, they possibly couldn't have anything valid to say, or somebody just mentioned to me that they love your work, but because you have commercials on your show, therefore there's nothing that your show could possibly have of value to present. So they're using that would be actually a circumstantial ad hominem against you, rather than just going through it and taking out the information that's valid. An appeal to authority is a very common fallacy, where typically somebody believes someone strictly because they have a white coat on, like a doctor or a scientist, or somebody who sits behind a desk in front of a TV camera and calls themselves a news correspondent or something like that, or a politician. It typically has to do with somebody putting on a funny costume, like a coat or a hat, a police uniform, whatever it may be, and then using that as their position of authority, rather than dealing with real facts and information. And then you have appeal to belief, which is if you don't do X, God is going to come down and punish you, or most people believe that X is true, and therefore you should believe it's true because they do, that sort of thing. Appeal to fear is if you don't do this, all of these bad things are going to happen if you don't, so therefore you have to do it. I think Larkin Rose gives a great example of this fallacy in his presentation. These people, if they don't throw the body into the volcano every year, the volcano god is going to come and get them. And I know Larkin was on your show a few weeks ago.
Yes.
And he's been on my show as well, and he always is an excellent presentation. I very highly recommend people get completely familiar with his research and what he's presenting in regards to the myth of government. And then, of course, there's appeal to pity, appeal to popularity. If you do this, if you buy this car, if you drink this beer, you'll have all the pretty girls. Appeal to ridicule. An appeal to ridicule is a really funny one to use. An appeal to ridicule. It's really you. Let's say you make a claim that and you present whatever claim in your evidence, and I say, well, Mark, your claim isn't true because, and that's all the evidence that I care to present. I just laugh at you. So this is known as an appeal to ridicule. And it's a very common tactic. You'll see TV news pundits use this sort of thing all the time. A caller will call in with some real information, and they'll just, you actually think that this or that, or and that's all the evidence that, or that's all the backing that they'll use to refute the claim, which, these are just tricks. And begging the question. This is a very common one that Christians like to use. Let's say they're talking about something out of the Bible, and they say, well, I know this is fact because it was written by God. And you say, well, how do you know it was written by God? And they say, well, because it says so right here in the Bible. You can't use the same source that you're reading from as proof of the claim that you're making. And there are post hoc fallacies such as a black cat crossed my path last night, and therefore when I tripped over the sidewalk and stubbed my toe today, it was because of the black cat. That's a post hoc fallacy. And there are misleading vividness. Another favorite that politicians like to use is the red herring fallacy. And the red herring fallacy comes from the old days when they would teach a hunting dog how to go after a fox. And what they would do is while they were training the dog, they would take a fish or a herring, and they would drag the fish across the trail of the fox, and they would try and get the hound to follow the trail of the fish. So what you're doing is you're laying out an entirely different topic, and you're trying to lead that person off the trail of the original topic that they were pursuing onto this completely other, unrelated topic. And Another similar one in this category is the straw man fallacy. And the straw man, well, a corporation is a straw man, for instance. But what a straw man is if I present an argument of something, let's say I present argument XYZ, and somebody will take my argument XYZ and they'll tweak it just a little tiny bit to make it look very similar to the undiscerning eye to my argument, when in fact what they've done is they've taken key elements of my argument and they've changed them to state their own positions, and then they'll attack and debunk those positions that look like mine but aren't, and then they'll say, ha, see, I refuted this person with this, even though they never refuted the real argument in the first place. Another fallacy is two wrongs make a right, which is a common one that people like to use. And I also recommend that people get familiar with the Latin names of the fallacies as well, because having the Latin names under your belt can be very helpful in identifying a lot of these types of arguments.
Jan, it sounds like overall what all of these appeals to different sources of misdirection to try to take people off the course of actually looking at the information, what they're all ultimately based upon is fear. The same thing that creates all negativity in every aspect of any aspect of our lives.
Fear or emotion in general, because some of these are like, an appeal to popularity isn't necessarily appealing to fear. You're saying, hey, if you do this, that hot blonde over there is going to come over here and she's going to take care of you, that sort of thing. So it's not really, all of them aren't necessarily working on fear, but they are working on different aspects of human emotion. And if those aspects of human emotion aren't understood, and in fact an explicit level of understanding placed on top of those emotions regarding the fallacies, so that when they come up, you can identify them. That's how this is used. And so when you lay out the Kabbalah tree, you can see how all of these different possibilities are right there.
Segment, you gave a great breakdown of some of the logical fallacies that are employed that the Trivium helps us to see through to get to the truth of the matter that we're looking at. So I want to talk a little bit about the suppression of this method of education, of becoming a self-taught individual, ultimately is what the goal of the Trivium method is. And, this has been deliberately removed from the educational system. I want you to talk about why you feel that's been done and what the implications are in consciousness and in the development.
I'm sorry, of which part has been done? I missed one sentence there.
The Trivium has been removed completely from the educational system in the modern world. And that deliberate suppression, I want you to talk about what you feel the implications are of that for human consciousness in general and the direction that humanity is moving in the future, since we now have outcome-based education system.
You mean since the fall out of the garden and down the tree of knowledge?
Sure.
I mean, the implications of the loss of the Trivium in education and everything are so huge. It's inestimable, really. The cost of all of this on humanity and all of our well-being and welfare right now in the present. It affects everything from the current state of affairs with politics and marketing and our commercial television and radio, and it affects the law systems and all of these things that these politicians push through to manipulate us and control us, and it affects how people are willing to assign their autonomy over to some criminal politician, all for some vote as an allusion to freedom, and rather than realizing that it's their vote that gives the consent to these criminals in the first place. And it affects people at the core level, because even bachelor's and master's degree students today that graduate from so-called liberal arts educations don't have the true classical trivium and quadrivium of the 7 liberal arts, and they still don't have the traditional means of critical thinking. So hold on just a second, please.
Sure.
It has a method, and as far as it's just breaking down people's ability to think, to interact with each other properly, to be autonomous, self-sustaining individuals, and take care of ourselves and our own lives, and not give our autonomy over to other people, as Larkin again so poignantly points out. And it affects us on a nutritional and dietary level, because we believe and buy into whatever they tell us on the mainstream media and the commercials and things like that, when this information couldn't be further from the truth. They want you to believe that animal fats and cholesterol are bad for you, and that everyone should be a vegetarian. And meanwhile, the brain is made out of cholesterol. And if you don't have animal fats, you can't reproduce. And when you plug in all of this population control and eugenics stuff, all of that plays right into this stuff. And I know that's going to upset a lot of your listeners significantly. So I do recommend people go on my site and listen to the two recent shows I did with Dr. Glidden and Dr. Wallach, just for instance, on those topics. And so there's really no aspect that the Trivium and Quadrivium don't apply to people's lives, and to be able to think clearly and critically with the information coming in via the five senses, and quickly determine the proper course of action before leaping to an action without having an understanding of the proper action that you need to take before you make that first step.
It helps us to engage our responsibility. That's ultimately what the Trivium does. It enables us to be prepared for whatever scenario comes our way. So great response there. I wanted to ask you about your take on homeschooling, and if what steps parents can take to ensure that their children will grow up with the Trivium method in hand. Is homeschooling a must for that to happen?
Well, homeschooling is not a must. It's certainly helpful. And in elementary school, the most important thing is for children to do mimetic learning in the first place. And so, they're not going to do too much damage to the children at the younger ages. It's when they get into junior high and high school that the real damage is done, when the kids really get frustrated with, with math and things like that, and not having a firm understanding of where or why things are being taught. And I've heard so many times, kids say, mathematics that's taught in high school and the like, that they would never have any use for it in real life, and what would they ever possibly use it for? And this is simply because they don't understand, because it's not taught in the context of the Trivium, of being able to walk outside into nature and see how leaves and plants and animals and everything out there is based on the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio and all of this stuff. So, as far as the education system and everything, it's well, I don't really know how to conclude there. I kind of lost my train of thought right there.
Well, the basic question was, what role will homeschooling play?
Yeah. And so, homeschoolers, it is, and I recommend, especially for people that can't handle the workload of it, to seek and find out homeschool groups, so that you're working with other groups of like-minded individuals that are trying to teach their children this information. And on top of all of that, there isn't really a good solid book out there right now to teach the Trivium to children. There are a couple of Christian versions. Harvey Bluedorn has a version of the Trivium, a Christian version of the Trivium out there. There's a Diane Lockyer or something like that as a Trivium book out there to teach the children Trivium. But these are very Christian slanted, and they tell the audience to omit specific researches and the like in their teaching the Trivium to children, which I completely disagree with. You don't limit and omit information, because obviously by doing that very act shows that you have an agenda to protect. But nevertheless, these sources out there do have valid information in it, and you do not want to kill the messengers. So what you need to do is, when you study these sources, you turn on your Trivium filter and you just spot those fallacies when they use them in those agendas and navigate around them so that you can get the value out of those teachings. And Harvey Bluedorn is probably the leader, publicly speaking, right now, teaching the Trivium to children, whereas we focus more on teaching it to adults, which has been omitted from the education system for all of us. So there's a gap out there still that needs to be filled in both. And even the book The Trivium by Sister Miriam Joseph, that's been around since the 1930s. She was a Catholic nun, and that book is filled with her own agenda and things like that. So all of this stuff has to be taken into an account, and hopefully, sometime in the next decade, we'll begin to see books coming out that provide the real Trivium without any agenda, just laying out the facts and the truth without anyone's personal agendas caught up in there. And so far to date, as far as I know, for the last 2,500 years since the Trivium was created, there hasn't been one.
Interesting. So I do want to get your take on some resources that people can get into to learn more about the Trivium. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the second hour. What we are going to do now is get ready to bring Bob Tuscan onto the show. He's going to be coming up in the second hour. Bob Tuscan, of course, one of the great hosts here on Oracle Broadcasting. His website is bobtuscan.com, and we're going to bring him on to join the conversation with Jan and myself to continue to talk about the Trivium and how we can employ these methods to really regain control over our thoughts as a whole, so that we can once again take ourselves onto the right course as an entire species and get out of the mess in consciousness that we have put ourselves into. To talk to one of our great guests today, Jan Irvin and Bob Tuscan. I'm about to bring Bob up on the air in this segment. Bob Tuscan is an eternal student of economics, science, and the arts, an organic gardener, an activist, and an Oracle Broadcasting radio show host. With a strong solutions-based approach, with the skills of the Trivium firmly in hand, with Bob Tuscan, you can be sure that the truth will be told. Bob Tuscan's website is, of course, bobtuscan.com. He has a great show here on Oracle Broadcasting every weeknight from 8 to 10 p.m. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show, Mr. Bob Tuscan.
Oh, thank you. What a warm round of applause from the audience. I really appreciate that.
Bob, I can't imagine anyone who doesn't love you.
Well, you have to have a sense of humor. And some people don't get that. Jan, I posted that video about the guy who says he eats toothpaste when I was talking about fluoride in the Trivium room. Because I think part of understanding what's going on is being able to have a sense of humor and take things in context. That's an important skill amongst the many skills brought forth from the Trivium, is just merely taking something in context. You don't know how many times people, for whatever reason, want to take something out of context. I think I just came up with a new fallacy. I'm sure there already is one, but it's a taken out of context fallacy. Yeah, what's the name for that? What's the Latin for that?
Wouldn't that be sort of a straw man?
Yeah, and I guess in a way it is. Yeah, exactly right. So, there's so many different takes on this Trivium stuff, but I'm sure glad that people are starting to use this as a prerequisite to seeing all the other information that's provided.
Yeah, isn't it fascinating to watch it take root in all of the quote-unquote truth movements? I mean, armed with the Trivium, the truth movement could actually become the truth movement.
Exactly right, the true truth movement, absolutely. So, it's interesting, Jan, how we've seen this really start to become the prerequisite, but we did it backwards. We first woke up, and I'm doing air quotes here, whatever that means, and then we started to realize how we have to learn to learn. In other words, how we can implement the 7 liberal arts to understanding.
Right. And basically what happened is a few people managed to climb up through the Kabbalah tree of knowledge and wake up their crown chakra, typically with psychedelics and the like. but without having a firm understanding of how to learn of the trivium, grammar, grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and then the quadrivium, people become very susceptible to being controlled while they're in that state, which is what we saw exactly with the psychedelic movement of the 60s being usurped. And in fact, you find out later that guys like Gordon Wasson, the so-called discoverer of magic mushrooms who worked for J.P. Morgan Bank, ended up being a chairman to the Council on Foreign Relations and stuff like this. So, I mean, today we can look back now with the knowledge of the trivium and see how prior movements were usurped, and see how the big bands of the 60s were almost entirely the sons and daughters of U.S. intelligence officers and things like this, and move forward, hopefully this time with a real bearing and a real direction of where to go and how to deal with this mess.
Well, that's the break music, and we'll tell us a little bit about the role that it's played in your life so far.
Well, I'm a student of philosophy, and as far as the indoctrination camps and public education systems, and it's never really jived with me that I have to just accept the answers that the teachers want and regurgitate that to them. Erica Goldson gave a talk as valedictorian of her high school, which went viral on the internet. And I had watched that, and it really resonated with me and made me realize that me not doing well in high school and the traditional indoctrination camps had no real reflection on being able to be a good critical thinker and being able to think for myself and not just to assume something as truth. So I've always had kind of as a background this notion that it's very important to entertain a thought without accepting it nor negating it. Okay, so listening to Coast to Coast AM at 10 years old, I'm a fairly young guy, as many of your listeners know, Mark. I was able to entertain, some of the kooks and some of the other stuff, the aliens or whatever was. I was able to consider these things and accept it as truth, accept it as information. Have those building blocks of grammar, and be able to consider it, not necessarily accept it as truth, but at the same time, not negate it altogether and see where it fits in as a puzzle piece, if you will. So it's been very important to me to A, have an open mind, and then B, have a critical mind and to be able to see through the lies. So after doing my show for a while, I ran into Jan, and Jan and I started to talk about the Trivium. He showed me the interview at the time that was fairly brand new with Gino Denning, and came on my show.
And Bob, you and I have done a number of, I think you and I had already done a number of shows before that point together too, hadn't we?
Yeah, we had done some shows before that, but then we kicked it into gear and decided that this was something essential to share with my listeners. I was lucky enough to get to talk with Gino Denning and do a show with him. And it makes sense at the end of the day that, yeah, we are awake, if you will. But what we're awake to, we need to be discerning about. We need to not just accept something as truth. There's so much disinformation out there that, unfortunately, if you're not alert, if you're not equipped with the Trivium, you're going to be taken advantage of one way or the other. So that's why I started to implement this, to make myself a better thinker, to lend more credence to my shows and to my guests and the topics we talk about, but all the while still continue to keep an open mind. And that's kind of where I'm at right now is, I might not agree with all the guests that I have on my show, but I'm able to consider that. If we shut our minds, if we go into our reality tunnels, as the great writer from The Cosmic Trigger and other books, Robert Anton Wilson, puts it, if we close off that reality tunnel to any other information and grammar, the building blocks, the first stage in the Trivium, then we're not able to process it and make any sense of it. And then the third stage, of course, is rhetoric. And that's something that I've always done. I've always naturally been an activist in a sense and taken what I found to be truth and be able to act on that and show the wisdom. And that's why my show is so solution-oriented, I feel, is because of that third stage. You know, yes, we can become aware of all these different problems, but at the end of the day, what we can do about it is, in my opinion, more important, and therefore we need to act in this third stage of rhetoric, if you will, with the proper wisdom to handle all of this, you know, to put in place the things that have checked as truth or not truth after it goes through the process, going through the you know, building blocks and then the logic stage. Once we get all those things together, we have to know what to act on and what not to act on. We have to decide, well, that's a relevant thing to deal with. That ranks here. Therefore, we need to put this initiative into action. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely, and it really highlights your entire process here that you've laid out, highlights something that I talked about at the end of last week's show when I showed a picture of the human brain with the left and right hemispheres of the neocortex and explained sort of the process that we go through when we're engaging in the process of the trivium. When we take in the information at first, we have to be open-minded. That's a right-brained process. You have to take the information in from an eclectic...
let me interrupt you very quick there, Mark. You should be critically minded, not just open-minded, because open-minded, you can allow yourself to be infected with things, but being critically minded, you're using the filter of the trivium and blocking the fallacies and junk from coming in, but still allowing the valid information coming in, and you're not dismissing things without studying them first.
Sure. Well, what Bob was saying is, like, you know, when he would listen to Coast, he would be able to remain open to some of the possibilities of these concepts, but then he would apply the logical reasoning methods to them and then remove fallacies from them to be able to determine what's true and what should be acted upon. That's a left brain
I just wanted to make a distinction between being just generally a lot of people sell the idea of open-minded, of
accepting everything, right.
So we need to be, I think we need to have a distinction and not just say open-minded, because open-minded, I think of a lot of people in the New Age movement that just kind of accept whatever, and so we need to be careful of that, and we need to remove the stigma away from being critical-minded and re-employ critical mindedness as a good thing, because when somebody says, "Oh, you're being critical," they usually say that as negative, and they also use like logic. They think of Dr. Spock, and that's not a good thing. Thanks to my friend George Clayton Johnson that wrote the first episode of Star Trek, right? So, we need to keep these things in mind when we're looking at this, so that we don't fall down those traps. And the same thing has been done to the word trivium itself. It's been trivialized, and the word liberal of the 7 liberal arts has been taken and spun into meaning tax and spend communist or something like that. So all of these things are terms that have been misused, and I think we just need to clarify them and be more specific when we use them.
To quote myself from the Free Your Mind conference, I stated that an open mind without critical thinking is a programmable mind. And if you're tired of being programmed, be an open-minded thinker, but with the skills of critical thinking. You have to have both. One can't work without the other. So it is, in a sense, good to be open-minded, and it's an essential part of taking that trip down the rabbit hole that so many of Mark's listeners have.
You allow the information. You allow the information in and you pay attention to it, but with your filter and your trivium filter and your fallacy filter turned on.
Right. Such that you can not necessarily prejudge it, but you can judge it as it is coming into your senses.
There you go. Exactly.
Right.